And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, 90 Weybosset Street in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. CoalitionRadio.us, Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, and the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And in a moment fitting of the goings on this evening, just a few miles away from here, our all apolitical anti-billionaire baseball boys club Twitter feed at Pawtucket is home. Getting off to a few minutes of a late start here on this beautiful, somewhat crisp, early autumn evening here in La Prave. The college students have been back for weeks. They've still got a little bit of daddy's money, so the streets are alive here in Providence. Tonight should be quite the night, and it should be quite the weekend here. This is the time of year why we love New England. Yeah, it's not just the leaf peeping. It's the attitude, the fun, the sense that we live in a very, very special place. And we do. There's so much to do on a weekend like this. Things that I would bring to your attention. Finally, the tourist crowds are starting to back down in Newport. Maybe the prices will too. A place like Misquamicut, Matunic, all along the South Coast. South County, as we call it for folks from Rhode Island. And yes, there is no such thing as South County. But along the coastline, it's a beautiful weekend to go for a walk on the beach. And you might actually be able to get a table fairly quickly at some of the best restaurants in Rhode Island. Crazy Burger in Narragansett. Listen, folks, if you're looking for a great place to take the family or just a relaxed brunch, one of the best breakfasts in Rhode Island, or just a casual dinner, Crazy Burger, year-round. Matunic Oyster Bar, just beautiful spot. I had the privilege last week of being taken to the Greenwich Bay Oyster Company, right on Main Street in the heart of East Greenwich. I will tell you, I had one of the best meals of my life there. Just wonderful place, great raw bar. The paella there was, and then my late mother-in-law, wonderful woman, made a fabulous paella. I know I butchered that, but again, the food there was spectacular. Tiny little place, full of atmosphere, all Rhode Islanders. I have to say, I hadn't been out in East Greenwich in several years. East Greenwich does an astonishing job on Main Street there. Just great little restaurants, an active theater scene right there, coffee houses. They've recognized clearly what the late, great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci realized, that downtown areas now are really not areas of commerce anymore. They're areas of entertainment. And given the nature of the town, its proximity to the water, I have to tell you, EG, to a certain degree, rivals some of the best aspects that Providence has to offer. And it's right there off the water. So worth a trip. Westerly, one of the hidden gems in Rhode Island, up here in Providence-centric, where the urban core seems to rule the day in the state. Not enough people take the time to go down to Westerly. Beautiful bookstore down there, great little downtown, lots to do. So if you're fortunate enough to have at least one day off this weekend, take the time, spend locally, go to locally owned businesses. You know, they're going into the time of year where tourism is obviously going to be in a decline as a function of the weather. They need the support of the rest of their Rhode Island family. And then we're going to try to get some of these folks, in the coming months to talk about their businesses. So you have a place to go on the weekend. Try something new. Have a sense of adventure. At last moment's choice, I should say, checking, right now the Kavanaugh coronation continues. It's the opinion of the Coalition Talk Radio that this is highly troubling on a number of levels. Let's take the first and the most important. And that, of course, is his legal temperament as a judge, not how mercurial he is, not how entitled he may seem to be to some, but his legal temperament. This judge is terrible on the Fourth Amendment. He thinks the Patriot Act is just okie dokie. He believes that government has the right to collect metadata. The Coalition Radio couldn't disagree more. We supported the first choice by the current president for the Supreme Court, based in part on some of those reasons. However, going beyond the clearly controversial and emotional ideas that have been challenged in open hearings now, we need to step back and understand whether this type of individual is going to be a good judge. And by that, understand the entire Constitution. I had the privilege earlier this week of going up to Smithfield and spending time with folks at the Smithfield Outdoorsman Club. What an organization. You know, I sat there through their monthly meeting. A couple hundred guys and gals in the room, not just shooting, archery, fishery, outdoors, wonderful programs for the youth in their community. Just a real family environment. And they give a lot back to the community. So clearly, I believe in the Second Amendment. I believe that one has a fundamental right to act in self-defense. And that that's a natural born right, not just necessarily granted by the power of government. And clearly, we believe in the First Amendment here, because we say some pretty awful things about our elected leadership. The Fourth Amendment, though, seems to be the great challenge. And by that I mean, it's seemingly, even after all these years, the notion that if you have nothing to worry about and you haven't done anything wrong, then it's okay for the government to invade your life. It's not. Ultimately, the logical extension of the continued accumulation of those powers will affect all of us at some point in time. Not because people are engaged in nefarious activities, not because someone's done something illegal, but the very definition of what's nefarious, the very definition of what is illegal, clearly is a concept that transitions between generations. Government was not designed to be all-controlling and all-powerful. It just wasn't. So with that in mind, we need to understand that we are the stewards, we are the guardians of these rights, the right against illegal search and seizure. That constitutionally and also as a right granted to you by birth, you are entitled to keep one's own counsel. And the notion that the government automatically, whether it be here in Rhode Island with a DNA database that was brought to you in part by your Republican Party, whether it was the right to, without warrants, investigate the prescription medical database, a database that never should have been created. The right for government to accuse you of a crime, which can literally upend your entire life. The simple accusation of a crime. I'm talking legal fees, judgment by the community, reputation. That they could do that without sufficient proof, and that they can investigate you without sufficient cause? No, sorry, that wasn't part of the plan. And that's the primary reason why we oppose Judge Kavanaugh. Now, with regard to the issues we said last week, I simply don't believe enough of a vetting has been done, both as to the temperament and the issues surrounding the alleged attack. On the other hand, the problem with the Democratic Party is that they have really no legitimacy to take the high ground, because they've been so evasive for so many years on the very same issues regarding their elected leadership. So as always, it comes down to the central point. We have a duopoly in this country. And what I mean by a duopoly is we have two political parties for whom, as it was demonstrated by this week's events in Rhode Island, that party is more important than principle. That party allegedly seems to constitute some type of bloodline, some sort of genetic connection, so that when in fact one rises in opposition to the party, one is to be damned for all eternity. Which of course brings to mind what happened this week with Patricia Morgan and her endorsement of Joe Trillo, who was on this show just this past week. Hardball politics, my friends. We need to move beyond the duopoly. We need to have multiple choices. We'll have two candidates tonight on. Paul Pence, who's running for the lieutenant governor's position as the endorsed Republican and the gentleman who won the primary. We'll also have Dr. Luis Munoz, who will discuss this week the very nature that the duopoly in working with legacy media uses to minimize, marginalize, and limit the competitive abilities of independent, non-duopoly candidates. And we'll touch on what happened with, ironically, irony is a pretty common word here in Little Rhodey, ironically, what is turning out to be its own little tempest in a teapot. Perhaps eclipsed in the news cycle by what happened with Patricia Morgan this week and Joe Trillo, but equally as important, if not more important, and that was the behavior of the Providence Journal this week in terms of, well, their decision to have a public occurrence, I think that was the term, where they would talk about divisiveness. Irony is not understanding that the bully pulpit that you occupy, largely as a result of a war of attrition amongst newspapers and legacy media outlets in the state, has put a certain organization called the Providence Journal, where they are actually one of the prime causes of, well, let's say, be blunt, divisiveness. And that came quite to the head just this past week. So we'll talk with him on that. That one other issue. We have got an event coming up that's rather unique in the recent history of Rhode Island. The Rhode Island Road to Liberty Forum is going to be taking place at the end of October. Full disclosure, of course, I am the chairman of the Rhode Island Libertarian Party. This week, we'll talk about Jeffrey Tucker and Scott Horton, who will be appearing there. We'll be promoting it through the coalition as well as Libertarian Party channels. Jeffrey Tucker is a renowned economist from the Austrian School of Economics. He talks about minarchy, anarchy, the role of government in one's life. He's erudite in a way that seems, well, old school by definition. But he is able to speak truth, to vocalize, and in a sense to crystallize the concepts of the individual personal freedom that have been really rooted out from our current culture. Scott Horton is a published, well-known pacifist/veteran from the website antiwar.com. He'll be joining us as well. And that's the final Saturday at the end of October at the Warwick Crown Plaza. Tickets are on sale at lpri.us/forum. We'll have a number of regional speakers as well. But the focus of the event won't be on a political party per se. And while sponsored by the Libertarian Party, the focus of the event will actually be to have real discussion on the nature of government, whether it be government and the art of war, government and the act of personal freedoms. It's going to be quite compelling and possibly like nothing you've seen here in Rhode Island. So we invite you to go to lpri.us/forum. Folks, we're going to take a very quick break, and just joining me in a minute or two is someone I've gotten to know well over the last year, who's someone whose company I enjoy, someone who's a very good sport because I tend to tease him mercilessly, but I think is going to make a compelling case to become the next lieutenant governor of the state of Rhode Island. The coalition will suspend its normal objections tonight to the presence or the existence of the office itself, and instead we'll talk about what his ideas, a little bit of background on him, and give rise to the voice that there are other choices besides the current individual. Paul Pence joining me in just a few minutes. And of course, Dr. Munoz is going to be joining us in about an hour or so. So that's the program for tonight. Folks, stay tuned. We're going to do a little bit of shifting around with the chairs, and we'll get Paul on right away. We are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, brought to you by, amongst others, Yacht Club Soda, Beacon Shipping and Logistics, and of course, Darrell Gould and his hearty crew air sciences, fighting biological hazards in the home, the school, and the workplace. Without their support, this show could not exist. So stay tuned. We'll be right back. And we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media broadcasting live on the Worldwide Coalition Network. Brought to you in this hour by Yacht Club Soda. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio. On the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio. And of course the mothership at coalitionradio.us. As I mentioned in the intro to tonight's show, joining me live in studio is Paul Pence. He is running on the Republican ticket to be the Lieutenant Governor of the great state of Rhode Island and Providence Plantations. Paul, welcome to the Coalition.
Happy to be here.
So let's start from a little bit at the beginning. The news cycle has been pretty tough this election. Mm-hmm. You've got here at the Coalition, we refer to it as either A, short attention span theater, or B, as a homage to the great Carol Burnett, as the stomach turns. This week was no different. Obviously, the decision by the former minority leader to endorse Mr. Trillo as an independent has brought with it rained down its own hailstorm of Sturm and Drang upon the news listening audience. And as at the Coalition, we believe our job is to focus on issues. And I'm not going to say that an endorsement is outrage porn. What I'm going to say is that the Legacies media, the newfound obsession with the latest, shiniest bauble, is outrage porn in the sense that, these are my words, not yours, in the sense that it again differs from the issue of the issues. So instead of talking about in depth the multitude of challenges we face, instead of focusing on the positives that we embrace, instead we are treated to what we call here handicapping the election. The rules of the Coalition are very simple. We do not handicap elections. I am not interested in a candidate's fundraising. I am not interested in a candidate's polling. I simply couldn't give a damn. I'm interested in issues. I'm not interested, in fact, if the candidate will win. I would like to know why the candidate should win. And that will be whether you're a representative, as you are, from a major political party, or later on in the show, Dr. Munoz, who's running as an independent. That will always be the mantra here because it is issues. But let's start from the very beginning because I'd like folks to hear a little bit about the Paul Pence backstory, a little bit about yourself, your life, your life as a Rhode Islander, what you do, so people get more of a flavor for you. Because now that it seems like the primary is over, the state's obsession, of course, is the gubernatorial race, which is unfortunate because there are other executive office races. First and foremost, of course, is the lieutenant governor's race. So tell us a little bit about yourself and how you got to this spot.
Well, it could be a very, very long story, but to make it very short wouldn't be fair to the audience who really is interested in such things. So I was born in California on a military base. I was an Army brat. My parents divorced when I was still a baby, and I found myself calling my stepfather Dad, who was also in the Army. My stepfather raised 4 kids that weren't his and 2 more that were his as one unit family. We lived mostly in the South, around Fort Hood, Texas, Austin, Texas, Georgia, Louisiana, 3 years in Germany. And my dad was a mechanic. He fixed things, and that sort of spilled off to me because in my life I became an engineer. I fix things. I fix, at first, manufacturing processes because I worked as a manufacturing process engineer, and later in business processes doing quality management systems. So I came to Rhode Island 21 years ago now, and Rhode Island gave me the one thing that every Army brat craves more than anything else, and that's home. And I want my home to be the best home it could be. I fell in love with the place. I married a Rhode Island gal. She's not a Rumford girl. She's a Riverside girl from East Providence. And I have an extended family of in-laws that I grew up without knowing my cousins and uncles and aunts. They're around someplace, but I never knew them. And now I've got family, I've got home, I've got a sense of place, and it's an amazing thing. And if I was going to cut the story real short right here, I would say I just want my home to be the best home possible, but it's a little bit more story to that. The turning point of wanting to run for office was when I was a reporter for the Westerly Sun in between career jobs. I attended the Richmond Town Financial Meeting. And at the Richmond Town Financial Meeting, I saw a room with 400 people in there struggling on how they were going to pay for the schools and the police, and will they have any money left over to keep the senior center open. And I realized then that I wasn't just doing my civic responsibility by being an informed voter. I was not doing my civic responsibility by never turning down jury duty. I needed to run for office. Well, that was a little over 10 years ago. And for 10 years, I've watched, I've made notes, I've saw where I can fit in and where I can't fit in, and for what I want to achieve of changing Rhode Island politics, of changing the political parties, of changing our relationship with government, Lieutenant Governor Slott's perfect for me with my skill set and what I hope to achieve.
Excellent. What is interesting, because I'm a transplant as well. I've been here a little longer than you, but there's something about transplants. Well, there's something about new believers that we're often very much more emotionally attached than, say, someone who was born into something, whether it be a religion or a place of birth, because we come from someplace else and we recognize either near potential or greatness.
Absolutely.
What was it about Rhode Island that really grabbed you?
Well, it was that family thing. When I first interviewed for a job in Rhode Island, it was about weather like this. It was a little bit later in October. The leaves had almost all fallen. And I was driving around after my job interview and looking at what the neighborhood was like. And I saw 2 women standing outside the house at the mailbox, leaning on the mailbox with cups of coffee in their hands. And I said, that's what I want. I want a place where people are neighbors. They know each other. They raise their families in one spot and make the place home. Now, when I was between jobs, I managed to do something about loving Rhode Island so much. I founded Rhode Island Roads magazine. It was an online travel magazine in the early days of the internet. I was getting circulations of over 140,000 readers a month, which made it the second largest circulation publication in Rhode Island until the profitability was killed by politics of the state government deciding to create a tax flow from websites. If you own a website in the state of Rhode Island and you advertise anything, sales tax must be collected. which then meant all of my advertisers, being affiliate advertisers, be able to ship.
Right.
And then my wife turned to me and said, "When are you getting a real job?" So,
No, I remember that so well, and
Yep.
I said to myself, at what point in time? Obviously, I'm a libertarian, so I'm a little bit more extreme on taxes than most. But at what point in time do they understand that? First of all, there's no God-granted right to tax every single thing in the world, and obviously that seems rather simplistic. But you see the real-world aspects of it because the very heart and soul of capitalism, for which I believe individuals reach their full human potential, is destroyed when you have to, that entrepreneurial spirit, that innovation is destroyed when you have to, in a sense, design your business around a tax system. I often say I spent a tiny bit of time in Bermuda working on a project once, and I saw businesses that just were allowed to be businesses. And people profited from them, and they hired people, and they spent money in the community, and they created wealth for everyone at every level, not simply the evil rich. And I just remember saying to myself, because I'm very familiar, obviously, as someone who's involved with websites with that affiliate program, that was just pure income stream into the state. Just whether you ran the tiniest little website
Yep.
or you had something significant like yours, that was just pure money. When you talk about the flow of money, outside capital coming into the state.
Yes.
And at what point in time do we have an economics intervention in the state when we force our leaders, sometimes elected, sometimes self-appointed, to understand fundamental economics? It really defies imagination. That businesses, that there's so little thought and effort placed into the, well, we would hope unanticipated side effects of these, ready, shoot, aim ideas.
Yeah. So when they talk about the Google stuff, they're often talking about the settlement over the prescription drugs, or
Right.
then they were talking about money that comes in from sales tax of all websites. But back then it was selective only if you own the website and live in Rhode Island, which if we were a gigantic state, taxation wouldn't harm us that much because, and taxation, philosophically, I understand. Businesses exist in war zones, but they don't exist in war zones where you have a peace zone right next door.
Right.
You cannot overtax Rhode Island and have Rhode Island survive because Massachusetts is right over there. It kills businesses.
People who have money and access to capital have choices. There's no, unless you're running a retail-oriented business that's reflective of a particular piece of geography. You have an oyster restaurant and you're in Rhode Island. Any other business, I had the opportunity once live on the radio to ask the, as we always say, the late great Vincent A. Buddy Cianci. I said to him, is there anything in downtown Providence, because he obviously loved the city, I love Providence. Is there any entertainment business in downtown Providence that you can't visit with equal ease from driving from your home in scenic North Attleboro, Massachusetts, that won't let you in? No. So when you create economic reasons for people who are willing to put risk capital in play and engage in commerce, if you create obstacles to them, they simply go somewhere else.
Absolutely. And not only that, but they have to compete with the people right next door who aren't burdened by ridiculous regulations and taxation that serves political purposes rather than true community needs.
Well, and we often talk about the situation in the last legislative session where our good friends at Yacht Club Soda twice got late night calls from friends, not their representatives, not any sort of government officials, no one in Commerce Corporation, EDC, or whatever we're calling it this month, that they wanted to place a tax on sugary soda drinks. Local business, 100+ years old, a significant property taxpayer to the city of North Providence. They ask for nothing, only they ask to be left alone and sell a healthy, if not use in excess, quality product using the finest material, something that we could all be proud of, so much so that they are the official soda of the state of Rhode Island. And yet, you had Republicans and Democrats coming together to create a tax which was designed by, and we beat this story to death, but it's so indicative of the arrogance of government. The very purpose of the tax, as it was written in the tax code, was to reduce the consumption of this product. Therefore, you had legislation being passed whose sole function was essentially to drive a legitimate, multi-generational Rhode Island family business into the ground.
Well,
that
would be the result of doing that. Not only that, but the sugar tax would only apply to Rhode Island businesses that use that sugar. Therefore, Coca-Cola would be immune.
Right. So they were essentially, as the term goes now, they were weaponizing the tax code.
Absolutely.
For social purposes.
Yep.
Is that the role of government?
That's definitely not the proper role of government.
Okay.
We
agree on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Any government that uses any group that wants to use the force of government to make people change their attitudes, their values, are definitely not good people. They're I don't want to be the person to say Nazis, but that is.
It's again, it's a very worst aspect of government because you're ruling by mob force.
Absolutely, and the sole purpose was to change behavior, not to have a program that honest people can argue over. Do we expand the park or not, or do we pick up the trash or not? It is. We want to change whether or not people drink sodas.
Astonishing.
Yeah.
So you decided to run for lieutenant governor. Why lieutenant governor?
Well, lieutenant governor has a few things about it that are especially good. The first off is it's not a policy-making decision. It isn't a legislative position. It is as close as you can have to a nonpartisan position and still be in a role of authority in Rhode Island. The lieutenant governor job has a couple nice aspects. It has the bully pulpit. There are some people who only want to become lieutenant governor because they want to be able to stand up and say, listen to me. It comes with access throughout the administrative aspects of the government. So you can knock on the door of DCYF and say, hey, I'd like to review with you why you had this happen last week. There's a chance of the lieutenant governor getting let in where other people wouldn't. And finally, it has the administrative freedom to be able to say, here's a problem. This is why it's a problem. This is how we can fix that problem. Let me help you fix it. And that's what I have done for my career. Engineers look at problems, they figure out the root causes of problems. They look at the systems, the feedback mechanisms, and all the things that make this robust or fall apart, and then they figure out how to make it fixed permanently so it never happens again. And that's fixing a manufacturing line or fixing a company's purchasing or hiring process. It's the same tool set that we need to use in Rhode Island government.
Right. Right. Now there's the other aspect, in the absence of a governor, in the demise of a governor, if let's say hypothetically that the current governor would spend an inordinate amount of time dealing with nationally political officials and people from out-of-state corporations and PACs in an effort to maintain and use the government as sort of a springboard. That would never happen here. I'm sorry.
No, not in Rhode Island. No.
What was that? No. What could I have possibly even say? I mean, imagine a state where a governor would actually take a campaign contribution from a utility company looking to build a facility in Rhode Island.
And then use the authority of the office to force it to be in a particular location.
Right. I mean, that would be criminal, right?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. Thank God that doesn't happen here. No. So you've got the other aspect, and it's very real.
Yep.
Some contend that if this governor is reelected, and whether it be 3 days into it, quite frankly, or a year or two into it, was offered the position somewhere else, anywhere else at this point, because the problem for this current governor, should she get reelected, is she's going to inherit not somebody else's problems, she's going to inherit her own. And, there's only, you know, the average time where you can point the finger to someone else is supposed to be about a year. Well, 4 years into it, she owns everything.
Absolutely.
You know, UHIP, Commerce Corporation,
Yep.
38, the ongoing regurgitation of 38 studios, children dying in DCYF. It's all hers.
Yeah.
I can't imagine for a moment that, given the right opportunity, she wouldn't be like, see ya, but I wouldn't want to be ya. So there is a very real chance in this go-around that you could become governor if elected.
It could very well happen. Now, that's one of the things that people laugh about sometimes. We still have Bob Healy on the brain. You know, he made the point that the office of lieutenant governor has one constitutional job, and that's to fill in for the governor if the governor dies or some other reason the position becomes vacant.
Well, is it true, though, if she goes out of town or is indisposed, that do you still assume the powers of governor for?
Well, in my job, in business and engineering, my boss has left town many times. I've never had enough authority to give myself a pay raise or hire and fire people while he's out of town. So for temporary absences, I do not think that it would be very well received of me changing everything.
Yeah, well, but it could be a lot of fun.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, if you're if you're looking for political maturity, you've come to the wrong place. Take my word for that.
But that does bring up the point that I thought you were getting at, and that is what happens if I need to become governor full time, not just temporarily. And that's where I was going with Bob Healy. He said that there is no job for lieutenant governor. The constitutional job to take over is by itself a full-time job if you're doing it right. If you're going to be able to take over for the governor, you've got to be hip deep in the governor's business. You can't have the adversarial relationship our current governor and lieutenant governor have where they don't appear. They may actually be best buddies and cooperating all the time. It does not appear that way to me. It doesn't appear that they cooperate and he knows much about what her plans are and how everything works in her portion of the government. If I have a Republican governor and me, it should work better than that because I'm not a threat to the Republican governor. If I have a Democrat governor and me, there's the possibility that I can be a thorn in the governor's side rather than be a party man who never speaks up.
Right. And right now, the current lieutenant governor, you should not be named, never does speak up, does he?
Not that I have recognized.
Right.
Yeah.
So let's then put that aside for a second. Your plans for the office. What do you believe are appropriate? It's been obviously, and I alluded to this in the opening. For me, I believe you could consolidate offices, blah 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 blah.
Yeah.
But under the current model, the current inhabitant of the office, who I would say I know personally, but I've had the opportunity to meet several times, and I don't speak ill of him. But his MO has been to essentially reproduce at some level the ongoing activities of existing cabinet positions. He allegedly engages in economic development. Well, wait a minute. Oh, we have a Commerce Secretary. He is engaged in, allegedly, and you'll have the opportunity to talk about his alleged involvement if you wish, but he allegedly engages in negotiations and discussions with our utilities.
Yep.
We have a Public Utilities Commission. We have an Attorney General's office. Actually, we don't. We have a Public Utilities Commission. Well, actually, we don't. But we have people, we are paying people a lot of money to do those things. And I have a problem with that because, you know, if you're putting people in a position to succeed, even if I completely disagree with everything the current governor stands for, he or she, by nature of their election, has the right to put people into positions to execute those responsibilities. A separate discussion is whether or not government should be involved in those responsibilities, but let's assume for now that they are. Here comes the lieutenant governor, and he's going to do his own little small business tour and a small business this and small business that, when he has no real constitutional authority to do anything other than be a promotional agent.
Well, there is a little bit more constitutional authority than that.
And talk to that. First of all, what do you see as the authority within the lieutenant governor's office?
Okay, so in addition to being able to take over for the governor, and therefore needing to be involved and understand the mission of the governor, there are 25 advisory boards, committees that the lieutenant governor either appoints people to or sits on. He sits on 6, 3 of which he actually leads. Those are assigned to statutory responsibilities by the General Assembly. So,
can you give a breakdown on some of those? What some of those are?
I didn't catch all those words. What?
No, can you give me a breakdown on what some of those are?
Oh, some of them are things that you and I would agree make great sense, like the Emergency Management Administration. If the governor were to suddenly vacate the office, it may very well be because of something really bad happening to the whole state. So that is a wonderful idea. Put the lieutenant governor in charge of that. The current lieutenant governor sits in the committee meetings and reads the minutes and passes the minutes, and then the next time reads the minutes and passes the minutes. Don't see a lot of activity. Definitely no changes that I can recognize, but he is at least holding the meetings.
Right.
The Small Business Administration, there's an advisory board for that. Long-Term Care Coordinating Council, he actually appoints several members to and sits on. And some of them are trivial things, like the, and I'm going to get the wording wrong, it's something on the order of Canadian American French Alliance Council or something like that. Yeah. So
I would love to be on that.
Yeah. Especially if it came with a paycheck. Yeah.
Lunch would be fine.
Oh, okay.
Pot of pho. Yeah.
Yeah. So. Yeah, so
that's my suggestion. If you like him, that's my suggestion. I think you should make that first and foremost.
Yeah, so there's those statutory requirements. There's also the traditional responsibilities of the lieutenant governor, which is walking in parades, waving, helping to meet dignitaries, and basically be a cheerleader for the state. And I've been a cheerleader for the state since I got here, but with the magazine, it's still in business, by the way, has been running since 2002. It's barely in business.
What's the website again?
Rhode Island Roads Magazine.
Okay.
As riroads.com. Okay. So it's a real magazine. It's not a blog, but I established this before anybody even used the word blog, or hardly anybody used it. And real articles and photography. It's not just, hey, I ate a cheese sandwich. Okay. The forgot where it's going. Oh, okay. So the traditional responsibilities has one additional responsibility that traditionally has fallen on the lieutenant governor, and that's being an ombudsman. Everybody in Rhode Island has this feeling that public servants should be public servants, that they should be able to walk into anybody's office and say, hey, I've got a problem. Doesn't matter what the problem is. It could be a real problem with the business licensing, or it could be that their neighbor's dog barks too much. But they still expect to be able to go to every single person who represents them and have that problem solved for them. Now that leads to the I know a guy mentality. Right. Like, I had a problem with my business licensing, but I know a guy, so it's not really a problem that the business licensing is such a headache for everybody, because it only took me half a day and shaking his hands and promising to support him in the next election. And that's blackmail. It's like the Black Knight of Monty Python saying, you shall not pass. You know, he found a bridge to stand in front of. He creates the obstacle, and then he says, be my friend and I'll let you go by. Give me money and I'll let you go by. Vote for me in the next election and I'll make your path easier.
So, I mean, what you're running now, when we last spoke, the primaries used to be taking place. What's been the strengths or weaknesses of the current approach to lieutenant governorship? Well,
you have to realize, and you do realize, but in the discussion we have to establish that lieutenant governor does not set policy. It does not vote on legislation, and therefore it is an afterthought when it comes to political power, which means it doesn't get a lot of attention. The only way to get attention is to involve yourself in the issues of the day, the vast majority of which aren't the lieutenant governor's responsibilities. So if we were talking about a problem with the nursing home or UHIP, we can say UHIP is causing problems for long-term care in the state. Lieutenant Governor has responsibilities in that area. I can get involved. But when we have national issues or cultural issues that capture so much of our attention, Lieutenant Governor doesn't have much of a say-so. You know, he's got the bully pulpit, but that's not his job to do that.
Yeah, so what then, I guess the next question would be is, what do you see? What's your vision of what needs to happen?
Well, I am a political neophyte. People claim the mantle of outsider.
Right.
Obama claimed to be an outsider.
Right.
Everybody who's run for office loves to say, I'm the outsider, I'm the guy who can get cooperation. I really am truly an outsider. And when I saw how to, where the problems are in Rhode Island government and our relationship with government, our problem is that we don't expect much of our politicians, and we don't get much, particularly from the people that we elect to the office of Lieutenant Governor. They're almost always career politicians who are being rewarded with basically a patronage job where they can sit and relax for 4 years before they retire, with extra 4 years pension, by the way. So we need to demand more from our politicians, but we're never going to demand more until we demonstrate that we can achieve more. And by getting elected as Lieutenant Governor, as an outsider, I can show the political party methods of getting us into office are not necessarily the only way of getting in. That once you're in, you can actually do something worthwhile while you're there. And therefore, him and him and him and everybody else who really can properly contribute to running the state government has a chance to have an effect themselves. And then we can also demand whoever gets the job next do a better job than I did, and the person after that do an even better job than him. It will change things if I get elected, and if I can be successful in doing things like making the registry more responsive to human beings, not celebrate when you're done with half a day of time. With the DCYF actually measure success some other way than returning children back to their original families, even if those families are dangerous for those children to go back to. If you have a problem with wetlands in your on your land, you can actually get an answer about whether or not you're allowed to pluck the toadstools off of the mowed grass before you actually pluck the toadstools. It would be wonderful if we could drive simplification of regulation, eliminate the ones that exist only to reduce competition, simplify and organize the ones that are absolutely necessary for public safety. It'd be great if we can reduce taxation. Those would be terrific. The job of Lieutenant Governor is not going to be highly successful by itself of doing that. The only way of getting that to happen is if we actually rally the citizens of Rhode Island to put people into office who truly believe that we need better governance.
I don't think there's anyone other than the establishment media and the establishment politicians who doesn't believe we need drastic overnight change. The only people who don't think we do are those who are vested in the process right now. The real challenge is being able to reach out to people and get them to transcend political affiliation and understand that it should actually be principle before party.
And that's another advantage of being a true outsider, okay? And that if I am Lieutenant Governor and I don't get reelected, I can go back to being an engineer. Unlike a career politician, if he loses the position.
Right.
He's going home. He has nothing else to do.
Right.
So he has to do something that always gets him reelected, even if it's not good for the state. If it gets him reelected, that is his measure of success.
Right.
And by being an outsider, even the Republicans didn't actually endorse me. You know, you mentioned endorse.
That was kind of a shot at the Republicans.
I got the nomination despite efforts to put in somebody more traditional of what is expected of a lieutenant governor candidate. It was a fluke. It was an unusual set of circumstances.
Right.
But sometimes weirdness works out in your favor. So
you go with it.
I can say honestly to every politician out there, I'm only doing what I want to do because this is the best thing for the state. It's not necessarily the best thing for my political career. It's not necessarily the best thing for my party, but it is the best thing for Rhode Island. And somebody who has a lifetime of politics can't say that and be believed.
Right.
I can.
Yeah, no, that's a compelling point. Most of the people running for this office really have a vested interest in perpetuating the current model, the current narrative, the current thought process, the current way of doing things. There's really no. It's interesting. More than one person in the media, in the other media, has said this. Where is the big idea? Where is that? And by that I don't mean, throwing all the money at another stadium or all the money at another gaming company. But where is the big idea that can resonate and be created by, enacted by, inflicted by government itself? Which largely is going to have to be something, they're going to have to cannibalize themselves in order to move the state forward. And, in marketing, I think the term is eating your young. You either innovate or die.
Yeah.
And we're dying because of the abject failure of our current leadership to innovate on any level.
Well, you use the word current leadership. It is not just this governor. It's every governor we've had for many, many governors going back have a way of looking at the world that doesn't work. And even the progressives recognize we've got a broken system. We need to fix things. Now, the progressives may react emotionally to things and want to solve the world's problems with more government, but there's no doubt that government in Rhode Island needs to be fixed.
Yeah. Yeah, it needs to be either replaced, fixed, or eliminated, depending on your perspective and the issues.
Yeah. Well, while I do have a lot of libertarian attitudes and tendencies, I'm a pragmatist. I fix what's in front of me with the tools I have in front of me. My wife, when she wants me to fix something, she comes and hands me a paper clip, and I say, "What do you want me to fix now?" She thinks that I can fix anything with a paper clip, even though sometimes the job requires a coat hanger or a crowbar.
Right. So what areas, and by the way, if you're just joining us, by the way, this is Coalition. As always, we are outrage porn-free media. Joining us live in studio is Paul Pence. He is the Republican candidate.
No, nominee.
Republican nominee.
Yeah.
For the office of the Lieutenant Governor. He's pointed out that he is not the endorsed candidate. The endorsed candidate chose to drop out. Let's talk politics for a second. Do you have much contact with the Fung administration?
I drop in and say hi. I crisscross paths with Alan Fung at events now and then. If we were running as a joint ticket, many people have expressed interest in doing joint tickets as a standard way of doing things in Rhode Island, then of course he and I would share offices and staff. I would hope that lieutenant governors get more cooperation than I have been offered. However, I haven't been run away with a stick. They always smile when I show up in their offices. And their people have been cooperating when I have asked for specific things. So they helped gather my signatures to get on the ballot. So that was helpful.
Okay, great. So what are the priorities then? Let's take it step by step. What you get elected. that big moment on in the middle of the snow? Do you get any, like, I guess Gina got like this like really cool gold like thing she got to wear.
Okay.
Does the lieutenant governor get anything cool?
I don't know about that. I understand our state reps get little badges that they put in a drawer.
Do you get like an old Paw Sox jersey or something like that?
Oh, could be. Who knows?
They'll retire your number when they retire the Paw Sox.
Or maybe a license plate that has number 2 on it.
But you try harder. You get elected. You get through to inauguration day, despite whatever teams are set out after you in between the election. I mean, if in the case of your sudden disappearance, who becomes lieutenant governor?
In the state of Rhode Island, it's I believe it's like the vice president is done presently, and that is the governor would be choosing a lieutenant governor, which is approved by the General Assembly. That actually happened back during the Dupree administration. I understand partisanship was so bad that, and this may be a joke, not reality, but they gave him an office, but it was a closet in the basement with a 40-watt light bulb.
Charming.
That was the only Republican lieutenant governor since 1968.
So, in order to, we always say break glass, add water. Mm-hmm. What's your first step?
Oh,
you get back to the office.
There's 3 ways to answer that.
By the way, the irony is, I'm putting out to all executive office candidates. Mm-hmm. I am available to be hired as a libertarian. I will sell out for that state job. So, if you want a strong policy person, I'm here for you. Okay.
Okay. So the most important thing is not the question you asked. Okay. Mm-hmm. The biggest, the first project isn't what you asked. It's what's the very first thing. The very first thing, what I want to be able to do is go to the Emergency Management Administration the day after inauguration and say, put in front of me every single emergency plan we have, and show me when was the last time that was reviewed. There's probably a lot of really important things to fix, and I can name a few. And there may be a whole lot more that are even more important that I have not recognized yet. Mm-hmm. There are things that are expedient to do, but if an emergency happens, it can happen at any time. So get those emergency plans in place. These are things that businesses always have on hand. You know what to do if there's a fire. You know what to do if the governor dies, in our case.
Well, all we have to see is what's happened in Providence this week with the school bus strike. Mm-hmm. The fact that there was absolutely no plan,
Yeah.
Yikes.
Yeah, and the plans could be a huge list of plans. A cruise ship running aground, a school bus running off into the bay. What about a terrorist attack in New York City where we're flooded with 200,000 refugees overnight? How do we handle those things? We may have emergency plans for those. But unless I see them, unless I know that we've reviewed them and know that our plans are intact and will work, we're not doing our job as basic responsibility of government of keeping our people safe. Mm-hmm. So that is the first thing I want to do on the very first day. Now, my first project is a different question, and the first project isn't the most important thing, but we've got to manage to demonstrate that the processes will work, that there's a method of that the methods will achieve success, and that is, let's get the registry waiting time down to 15 minutes. If we do that, then we can say to DCYF, you're next, we're going to fix you, and there's a chance of getting some buy-in. DCYF, where we've had 8 children die in the last 2 years under the watchful eye of the DCYF, that's unacceptable. It's critically important, but if I chose that as my very first task on the very first day, I'd go nowhere.
So you see yourself, and my terms, not yours, as sort of a kind of a stealth weapon aimed at bureaucratic chaos. And, essentially, as an executive officer, latching on to these wayward children, hopelessly out of control, as my wife would call her children occasionally, and they're all little hooligans, and just say, enough. Mm-hmm. Now, we're jumping around a little bit in terms of the area, but the most egregious one currently, and by the way, your point about emergencies is well taken. All one has to see is what's going on in the North Shore of Massachusetts right now with the gas line explosions.
Yeah. Oh, God. Yeah. I would never have dreamed of that being on our emergency plans, and I doubt that we have one here. And our Lieutenant Governor didn't stand up and say, look, we've reviewed our processes here, and we're confident that the same thing won't happen.
Right.
Heard nothing.
0.0. And one looks at these near misses that we've had over on Allen's Avenue. Yeah. Just the other night.
Oh, yeah, that tanker truck could have blown.
Right.
Yeah.
So and there seems to be so little public review of this.
Yeah.
So little communication with the public at large.
And it's very possible they're doing a wonderful job, but we don't see it. We don't know it, and that doesn't give us confidence.
No, and particularly after, again, on a local level, seeing what's happened in Massachusetts and just seeing, it's staggering to think. And again, this is where I fault the media. The media is all about reporting symptoms of a crisis. They're not interested in either the follow-up of the root cause, or not in most. I find that Katie Nagel here at GoLocal Proud, I like to call it answering questions we didn't know we had to ask. She does a wonderful job with that. And there are obviously some great people in local media, but in general, the notion that for years we've been relying on individuals, whether it be employed by government or outsourced, to transport our wee little beasties out to school, our most precious cargo, and we had no thought whatsoever. And it doesn't even have to be as dramatic as a strike. Companies go out of business all the time. What do we do?
Yeah, and that should be considered. Everything should be considered. Now, of course, we'd prioritize it. We'd say this will have the biggest impact and has the most likely thing of happening. So a direct strike from a hurricane would be absolutely disastrous for the state. It's a little bit less likely to happen than a blizzard. Blizzards have a bigger chance of happening or a little bit less impact. And something like a recall on all buses, where we have no buses to transport any children anywhere in the whole state, that's a very low probability. People aren't necessarily going to die, though now we've got more pedestrians and the risk has increased of harm to our children.
Well, we've already had 2 near misses.
Right.
Within 24 hours. So part of that is the communication system of the state. Rep Lancia has done yeoman's work.
Oh, excellent.
And bringing to light the issues surrounding the 9/11 system. Why do you suppose that's been so studiously ignored by government? This is as much a philosophical question as a practical one.
Yeah, and this one's likely to stay in philosophical because of the nature of government. And I will use words politics, political process, government, and all that. And there's really should be distinctions between them. Politicians' only reward is getting reelected. If they do something and it doesn't help them get reelected, that's a waste of their time and effort from their point of view. If they do something and it hurts their chances of getting reelected, that is adverse to them. Anything they do that increases their chances of getting reelected is, for them, the best thing to do. Well, the easiest way of getting people to vote for you is to give them stuff. So we, politicians, our politicians give money, not necessarily directly to individuals. Sometimes it's contracts or a new playground in a park or money for the senior center. Whatever it is, they are buying votes, not by, here's $5, vote for me.
It's not that overt, but it might as well be.
So anything that gets them money that they can then spend to the benefit of people who will vote for them, they are in favor of. And anything that takes that away from them, they are not in favor of. So they look around and they see, oh, look, there's a pile of money in the 911 funds. Let's put that in the general budget so we can use that for
the shrimp cocktails up at
Well, not necessarily for the strip cocktails, but it's for playgrounds or a program to educate more people in dog grooming or whatever it is that the government wants as their next program to get them more votes, to get them reelected. And that's why that the tolls are there. The federal government permits tolls if it's not an obvious restriction of commerce between the states.
Right.
So they purposely set it far enough in so that we're not doing an obvious toll to get into the state. But they are punishing truck drivers who avoid the tolls by going off on the community streets because they want to get as many truck drivers as possible to pay those tolls. The money used for that by federal government requirements can only be used for maintaining the bridge and the ramp access to and from the bridge. If that's a penny of that spent on anything else, the federal government will never kick in another dollar into maintaining that stretch of road.
Right.
So the purpose is to build a large stockpile of money, pretend that it's for maintaining this bridge that has another 20 years lifespan, not fund preventive maintenance or repairs on the thing, and then reroute that money for political purposes elsewhere. Even if it ends up sacrificing our ability to get funds from the federal government to maintain our roads.
Wow. What, all right, so you come into office, you do a top-down revisit, if you will, reboot of emergency management.
Yep.
What's next, then?
Okay, so emergency management, make sure they've got everything in place. Then making sure that we've got a working, viable ombudsman program going, so that when people have
I'm a political junkie. I had no idea he was supposed to be an ombudsman.
Well, no, that's what people expect of him. Okay, so people are already coming to me and asking about my help in helping them get their neighbors to properly trim their hedges.
Right.
Okay, they probably come to you because you're a public figure and ask you, what can I do about this or that or the other, and they're disappointed when you can't help them.
Right.
Okay, so that is what's expected of everybody. But if somebody goes into the office of Lieutenant Governor, they want a resolution of their problem.
Right.
I talk to people who are genuinely suffering, who are desperate for any help at all, and it's not the trivial things I've listed.
Right.
You know, people who need mental health care services or cannot get access to their children who have been taken into the DCYF program, even to find out if they're doing well. And they are so desperate that they are not just coming to me where I have no authority now and won't have any authority in the future. They are they will give away their own personal rights of directing their own future to a government that promises to take care of their problems. And that's scary to think that we are going to give away more and more and more of our rights in order to have something taken care of for us. And that is a part of what is driving the progressivism.
Yeah, there's a political case that's been made around the world, whether it be progressive Democrats or a variety of insurgent political organizations around the world. I won't mention because some of them have, I don't think for a moment that progressive Democrats are going to engage in violence, whereas some of these other political organizations around the world routinely do. So I don't want to draw any analogy to any specifics, but clearly building a welfare support state throughout any type of up-on-the-rise political organization is critical for building that type of loyal base. You know, in the absence of bread and water, you know, when you're dealing with a population, whether it be in the extreme sense in different parts of the lesser developed world, who are literally day-to-day fighting for survival, or in a much lesser case, but equally as troubling, if you will, philosophically, you know, you've got areas of the state of Rhode Island which have to play the game, do the dance, pay for the money, do the photo at the end, you know, with established representative in the Senate. I mean, what's your thoughts on this whole legislative grant program?
Well, that's definitely political.
Right.
Buying votes, not even disguising it. You know, it's not, hey, I'll give this company a contract that's a little bit better than they deserve. It is literally saying, hey, people in my neighborhood, I'm going to help you build whatever. I respect any politician who says, not only am I going to refuse that money, but any money that you would have gotten, I'll hold a fundraiser and help you raise that money.
Right.
That is the way it should be done. It would still build the political capital that the politicians want to build, but it wouldn't put a burden on everybody else in the state who doesn't have their children play in that playground, or their grandparents go to that senior center.
Yeah, you see so many of these politicians willing to sell their soul for a few $1,000s that could equally, just as easily be a part of the budget process.
Oh, that too.
And have, I mean, as a libertarian, clearly I'm against all of it. I think most people are against all of it. But you have a budget in place and you raise taxes and you account for initiatives, yet at the same time we insist on having this extra legal process where people are able to, build their own empire, if you will, for lack of a better term. And it's just terrible. It's just absolutely terrible.
And it is just a few $1,000s each, for the most part. That it is achievable. Most politicians have good connections, or else they wouldn't have succeeded in going into the political process and coming out victorious. They could raise that money some other way than taxing everybody in order to benefit a few.
Yeah, it's just absolute madness. All right, so you've got, and folks, again, if you're just joining us, Paul Pence, he's running for the office of Lieutenant Governor. He is, in fact, the Republican nominee. I refer to him as the Republican endorsed. However, most importantly, he is the man on the ballot and properly qualified to be on that ballot with a longstanding business career that can be used, should we continue the office, to benefit the people at large. The biggest issue, if you will, the 38 studios of this election, the tolls of this election, is clearly UHIP. I mean, that's just screaming for,
At this point, I don't see a whole lot of easy solutions for us on UHIP. If we throw out, and I've got tip of the tongue syndrome, Deloitte. If we throw out Deloitte, we start over fresh.
Right.
If we don't throw them out, we're rewarding them for being incompetent. Yeah. And there's no good solution.
Well,
but there's things that are we can get out of this. The first off is we need to stop addressing problems as little singular problems. When somebody's not getting us a check, we need to solve the problem why everybody's not getting their check, not why this one person's getting a check.
Yeah, and that's a constituent service in general, because we tend to focus on that one at a time person. To me, the single biggest issue with government, well, the number two issue. The first issue is the fact that it exists at all. The number two issue is that we constantly confuse the symptom for the illness.
Right.
The illness is not that we have a non-functional registry of motor vehicles. The illness is not that children are dying, as terrible as it is to say that. The real illness is the governmental pressures that led to the creation of the program, the office, the existence of these programs, followed up in a close second by, why do we go with this issue in the first place? And we need to annually, do an analysis of whether there's still a why there. As libertarians, we often talk about what's your why? Why are you doing this? And I believe in a significant, maybe not a majority, but a significant number of the programs out there should be eliminated instantly, because there's really no expectation, understanding, or elaboration of why we're doing it.
And no definition of what success and failure is for that
no
program.
benchmark.
So we spent money on a well-intentioned program to create a new generation of deep-sea fishermen who work on the fishing fleet. We spent a lot of money. We trained them. Very, very few got through the program, and none of them, and I may be wrong, but none of them are still on those boats. Okay, so but if somebody says, hey, we need to do that again, you can be sure somebody's going to scrape up the money out of the budget or put us a little bit farther in debt to to do a program like that again without a measure of success. What was, if we just given that $3 million to someone, he could have retired and we would have been ahead of where we are
Well,
now.
and that's the problem with this in the entire system, if you will, of transfer payments. At a certain point in time, if you just stay focused to the money you spent building it, compartmentalizing it, finding new ways to promote it. If you just simply give them the money up front, or say 2/3 of it, how often would they just be better off? It's an alarming thought because it attacks really the underpinnings of our entire approach to government. But it's a conversation that needs to be had.
Well, it is a point that needs to be in the conversation, but you were right, and that is a very, very important conversation to go to the actual base question.
Right.
What is it we're trying to achieve? Do we really want to achieve that? And are we making it happen? So we wanted people to be safer after the horrible occurrence at the Station nightclub fire.
Right.
So we required fire alarms and sprinkler systems in all sorts of buildings that are basically residential homes. B&Bs. If they had more than a certain number of rooms, they had to comply. Drove many of our B&Bs out of business. But how many fires did we have in B&Bs that happened before these rules and afterward? We ended up running people out of business when really we didn't reduce risk in any significant way.
There was a club up I believe it was on Smith Street over the Johnson line that was probably at that time the most popular club to hold, as we say in Rhode Island, a time at. And they were driven out of business. And there was a brief moment where Rhode Island politicians looked inward because they kind of accidentally shot one of their own in the foot. And there was that rut-row moment, what do we do? And ultimately they stuck to their guns. But UHIP seems to me to be a failure on so many levels. First of all, it's a failure of vision. And I ask this question of every candidate for general office as well as the legislature when they come in. In the year 2018, near 2019, does it make sense at any level for the state of Rhode Island to generate, invest in, and own proprietary IT technology for a transactional event?
Not only are we reaching the point where Giovanni Ferrosci was predicting us to go into the blockchain type environment, which I'm not going to get into. Even that aside,
thank you, by the way.
Rhode Island is so small that if it wasn't for our politicians wanting to say, look at this thing I did, we could have gone to Massachusetts and say, hey, can you add 5 more counties? Add 5 counties, we'll pay you a fee every year for this. Instead of, hey, let's implement a gigantic computer system that takes care of everything.
Right.
Let's join their computer system. But instead, they said, let's make a political point. We're wonderful, and by the way, let's launch it on schedule without regard to whether or not it's actually functional, and let's ignore problems when it happens because that makes us look bad. No, it should have been an all-hands-on-deck situation. They should have gotten everything fixed right away.
Right. Well, but you're absolutely right. And to my point, to take it one step further, if the 3 or 4 small states, Vermont, New Hampshire, Delaware, and Rhode Island, had all gotten together and approached, fill in the blanks, Amazon, ADP, any of these companies that are highly skilled at transactional computing environments, and said, okay, we want you to build this. We're not going to give you a penny, and you can charge us per transaction. So we have no stake in it whatsoever other than current use. We go to and before all the folks screaming out, but government should be doing it. Well, no. We don't use government to process our payroll, and that's the most sensitive stuff of all.
When we discuss this with people who are not thinking deeply about the process, they say, you want to privatize it. No, we don't want to privatize it. We want to deputize people. We deputize the people who inspect our cars. We don't privatize the inspections. They follow our rules. They answer to us. Charter schools are deputized schools. They're not privatized schools. We do that through a lot of functions of government, and where we lack the skill set or the resources to get something done, like we need a lot more health inspectors perhaps, we can deputize health inspections where the inspectors go out, follow our criteria using our methods, and answer to us, even though it's non-state employees doing the work.
Well, yeah, I mean, there's nothing to this that is so sensitive that it has to be done. I go to the DMV, and as I mentioned, Mr. Trillo last week, I'll just give you the Reader's Digest version, but I work during the day in the commercial truck business. I've registered vehicles in excess of 40 states.
Wow.
So everybody in every state complains about their registry. It's just one of those universal complaints.
Yeah.
And some of them, quite frankly, shouldn't, because some of them have figured it out. I can say without equivocation, based on nearly 20 years experience, all right, that we have one of the 2 or 3 worst registry of motor vehicles in the nation.
Oh, absolutely.
Bar none. Forget about the, I hate government. Forget about the, the Dr. Doom. Forget about all that. Just looking at it on a professional level as to how long it takes to create a transaction, what level of compliance you've got with existing government regulations as a result of the pain and threshold involved in processing an issue, just the level of mission creep, and just the sheer level of incompetence, and divide that by the untold millions that we've spent on it. If it wasn't for the human drama element, which is so important in UHIP, because people are genuinely suffering,
right,
this would be the worst abomination we have. But the human element is suffering, if you will, that comes about because government has created a dependency environment where people are dependent on the government simply to survive, and then, as is so typical, have failed to execute and deliver on that system. That's the worst.
Well, that's the nature of politics. When a MBA goes to work for a company, he finds ways of reducing preventive maintenance, training, quality control, because he wants to drive profits as high as he can and then bail out. Politicians face the same thing. Every 2 years in our General Assembly, every 4 years as governor, they see, hey, I can trim here, I can ignore that, we can forget about maintenance of our bridges and our roads for a little bit longer and let the next guy worry about it, as long as I get moved off from mayor to senate or from governor to secretary of commerce or whatever it is that the next stage is for this politician or the other one.
So in a very large degree, you see yourself in a role similar to what's been described as the Inspector General.
Absolutely. The one difference, besides the establishment of the role that has the proper authorities and tools to do the job, is that I'm a facilitator who actually steps in and helps make the change happen. The Inspector General would say, look, there's a problem, go fix it. I say, there's a problem, this is why it's a problem, let me help you fix it.
No, it's an interesting premise. I mean, and again, you know where my conflicts lie in terms of whether or not government should be involved in it. I don't know that as a nation we're going to swing over to a libertarian utopian paradise in the next 2 or 3 years. I think eventually we will. I think ultimately we should be asking ourselves in any of these bottomless abysses we jump into whether or not government should even be there in the first place. But if I could sum it up, and I want to give you a chance in a couple minutes we have left to kind of give an elevator pitch to the people of Rhode Island, because we are in conflict with, I don't know, there's a bunch of guys with pinstripes playing a bunch of guys in red, white, and blue tonight.
And getting paid huge amounts of money for it.
Right, far more than you or I. And you and I get to meet each other tonight, and they get to hang out with all sorts of folks. So we are going to put this into do whatever we can to promote this, because again, legacy media is it's not a conversation I'm going to pin you with. But in our next segment, we're going to be talking about extensively. Legacy media has done such a poor job of covering down ballot races, issues. By the way, someone brought up the other day ballot issues. I haven't seen a single conversation about ballot issues, bondings, things like that.
Yeah, there are 3 on the ballot.
And actually, I was going to lead into, you're the person I saw who brought it up.
Yep.
You're the person who literally like gave me the, I could have had a VA
Hey
moment.
guys, by the way, yeah, we're going to max out our credit card.
Right.
And by the way, we're going to spend more money in here. And by the way,
What are the 3 issues?
and I'm drawing a blank on the 3rd one. Okay.
Right.
And I'm going to give you general answers rather than specific answers.
Right.
But the very first one is one that the state wants to sell $250 million worth of bonds to do matching funds for the schools. Well,
Great.
matching funds for the schools will be spent for 3 schools. There won't be any money left after that. $250 million sounds like a lot of money, but when you're rebuilding whole big school buildings, because we've allowed them to decay and fall apart at the town level, because we'll use that money to give these people a pay raise or to keep this other program that gets us elected going.
Right.
We'll ignore the schools for now. We are subsidizing bad behavior, but at this point, schools are falling down. And statewide, I do care about every school child in this state. It's going to be awful hard to vote no on that. I fully expect that one to pass.
And that's part of the problem, because one of the things the Libertarian Party has brought up repeatedly is that there is no follow-up. You would be hard-pressed, and frankly, the 2 of us, I'm in the bubble. You know, I follow this stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I follow this stuff like some people follow the Patriots. One of the things that we've campaigned on regularly is the notion that as part of the ballot, you know, through the miracle of the World Wide Web, there's all sorts of data that you can provide. It may not be on the ballot when you walk into the voting booth. It may not be in the pamphlet that the Secretary of State mails out dutifully, but it can certainly be on a website. Mm-hmm. Is what's happened to the last 2 or 3 sets of ballot issues? Yeah. Where do they stand? Because there's 2 people who get to have forms of people who get to have this sort of collective amnesia. Weathermen. We don't ask them after 2 or 3 days, how did you screw that up? And bond issues. Mm-hmm. No one asks. Yeah. I think if we did a man in the street interviews, I think you'd be hard pressed to find anybody within shouting distance, including myself, who could list for you, never mind the bond issue coming up, what we just elected to spend. I mean, the only one I remember is the Rhode Island Engineering School. You know, do we know where that stands, where it's been spent? We just don't.
No, don't know. Okay, the second issue is money for higher education, 2 buildings or programs that they want to fund on the order of about $75 million. But that's on the order of $75 million. Now, I would have to actually have the sheet in front of me as a proper reference. And the third one was a conglomeration of multiple things, all related to environmental issues, green space, right. Things that any one of them you might support if it was local, but in order to get that local one done, you've got to support all the others too. Mm-hmm. So that's what politicians do. They group things together so that you, in order to get what you want, you got to approve everything else.
Right, and that's how they just sort of kind of schmooze it by us.
Yeah. So they did that with Fort Adams, Rocky Point, and India Point. Let's improve all 3 parks. Well, great. People in Newport voted in order to get their portion. People in Work voted for their portion. People in Providence voted for their portion. That was enough to push it over.
Right. And what happens to the rest of the state? You'll get nothing, and you'll like it. But should the state be in the process, in the position of responsibility of aggregating the concerns of individual communities and essentially using quote-unquote democracy to compel people in other communities to pay for someone's pet project? I have a moral issue with that. Well, that's coercion.
Yeah, that's coercion. That is definitely within your philosophical range of, it's wrong. But it's also wrong in that we should be driving government as local as possible. There's so many so many things that are done at the federal level that shouldn't be done by the federal level by constitutional reasons, but also they're better done at the state level. So many things that are done at the state level should be done at the local level. Things that are done at the local level should be done by your own family. But we tend to push things up and that leads to totalitarianism. We don't want, whether or not the street in front of us goes left or right or left, decided by somebody who has nothing at all to do with this community. That's the reason. We'll get off another discussion. I think you're running out of time.
Well, no, one of the things I want to do, I want to give you a chance to promote, you give people a chance to tell you where to find you. I'm going to pop something on you and my next segment guest, because I want you to both, and I hope you guys don't mind, but I want you both to come out here for 5 or 10 minutes, because both of you, I want to be very careful here. This is not a comment on the legitimacy of your candidacies. I don't think either of you have been given enough time in the public forum to discuss with each other these kind of issues. And I think both of you have compelling viewpoints that I would be fascinated if the two of you could spend 10 or 15 minutes, each of you pointing out, both of you, what you think are the single biggest challenges facing Rhode Island, and just talk about it amongst yourselves for a couple minutes, because candidates nowadays, they only debate. So by definition, there's got to be a dichotomy, there's got to be tension, there's got to be differences of opinions. There's very little conversation. And that's what the show tries to promote, is actual conversation. So first off, let's tell folks where they can find out more about you.
Okay. I've got a significant presence online and in Facebook, Twitter. Online, www.changeagent.us, or just my name, paulpence.com. And online, look for me at Pence, P-E-N-C-E, 4, the number 4, L-T-G-O-V. Either of those will get you more information.
Right, and we'll be sure to put them up on the page. So first off, thank you for coming in. Do you mind if I put you on the spot?
I have no problem at all.
Because
it may not be as smooth as you expect it to be, because I am in a political party.
Yeah, but it doesn't. Yeah. Well, but here's the key. Again, we're not interested in parties here, even though coincidentally I happen to be on the board of one. Just not. I mean, the conversation at this point in time has got to be about issues,
right?
Because that's everyday Rhode Islanders, normal people. The people we've seen walk by here tonight couldn't give a damn about political affiliations or parties. They just simply couldn't. They, and I'll draw the analogy to my favorite issue, which of course was the baseball team. I heard time and time again from leaders in Pawtucket that, the pride of ownership of a baseball team. Okay, that's nice. I kind of get that. But I would say the people in Pawtucket would be a lot happier and be more proud of schools that were neat and clean and safe and functional, or more proud to drive past a shopping center on Newport Avenue that was not filled with empty buildings, or more proud not to see boarded up homes in their community. That's what makes people proud, the ability to walk into their children's school and see their kiddo thriving,
right,
with a vibrant school system. That's the type of thing a parent goes home and goes to bed with a smile, because they know that they're providing the very best for their children. And whether or not that comes ultimately for most people, whether it comes from a Republican, the only people rooting for laundry in this state are the people wearing laundry. And that to me, and the events of the last few days with this near death grip obsession over who endorsed Joe Trillo and who didn't, and what that means and what that doesn't mean, that is an obscenity in and of itself. And that's what this state needs to move past. So if it's smooth, great. If it's not, but both of you strike me as eminently reasonable people who need to get more of they need the microphone more. And other people who are in this have had the microphone for a number of years. And we don't need them to use that microphone to just beat each other over the head with it. So, Doctor, are you here? Is there a doctor in the house?
Hey, how are you?
Good to see you again.
Good to see you. I hope you don't mind me putting you on the spot like this. I'm going to give you this. I'm going to give you this for about until 8 o'clock, and then we're going to have you on. What I want you guys to talk about for a few minutes is, because I want to see more debates. I want to see more discussion between candidates, serious candidates. That's not happening. All we're doing is beating the crap out of each other. And like I said, most of it's based on laundry. So I'm going to give you guys until 8. I want each of you to talk for a minute about what you think the most important idea is, and what your opinions are, and there's no right or wrongs here. The only thing that's right is that we need to hear from you folks. Okay?
Yep.
All right.
All right.
Have at it.
Okay, I'll switch here because I'll be leaving and you can keep that seat.
All right, thank you. Cool, so I guess that gives us 15 minutes.
Yeah, well, we get to give him a little bit of break and
Yeah.
we get to chat.
It was good to see you yesterday
Well,
at
thank
the
you.
meet and greet out there
Yep.
in Newport.
Okay, so we can tell the audience that we've met before. We've crossed paths a few times.
We have.
We've had opportunity to exchange a few ideas now and then. The discussion really hasn't been in-depth, adversarial, other than just, hey, I see you're running, how's it going?
Yeah.
You know, but every now and then a little bit of it comes through. I've listened to your exposure on the radio and been to your website, so I know a little bit about you. I don't know if you've picked up anything about me over the last...
More so in listening to some of the conversations and to the past hour as well.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
You know, so you're an independent, and I am just about as an independent as a person can be and still be a member of a party. That is on purpose as far as I'm concerned. I decided to run with the political party because I wanted to be taken seriously directly out of the box. People who are running as independents for this slot are getting even less exposure than you are, because there's not a great deal of newsworthiness to the lieutenant governor slot. So they, at least you have a chance of saying, hey, I have something to say about the issue of the day, while the lieutenant governor is, hey, pay attention to me.
Well, I've been campaigning, so for the audience, my name is Luis Daniel Munoz.
Yeah, very important.
I just stepped in. Independent candidate for governor. My background is I grew up in Central Falls, Rhode Island, graduated from Central Falls High School, was fortunate enough to have opportunities and took every single one of them. Went on to study philosophy and Italian, and then decided to gain a practical skill. Medicine was that skill. It would have allowed me at the time when I was thinking to address suffering, both mental and physical suffering. And so that altruism brought me into medicine, went to UConn School of Medicine, where I received my doctoral degree. And after really getting to understand the healthcare landscape and the disparities in healthcare that we currently have, and what that means essentially is really, if you look at community health, it's deteriorated over the years. People are getting sicker, and access to healthcare is becoming more difficult. That kind of was a disheartening enlightenment, if you will, and decided that, well, to make an assumption, and the assumption was, well, technology, industry, money, all these many things come together to drive innovation, then perhaps if I take that path with my doctoral degree, I can create some positive innovation that can lead to changes I wanted to see at the level of community health. I went on to make a medical device, built a small medical device firm, really centered around one technology, a scanner that would evaluate tissue injuries for patients with diabetes. Built that device, and then realized that the path for a device to get to market, because of all the regulatory steps that need to be taken, is long and requires a significant amount of capital to be successful in that path. And so at that point, my partners and I decided to partner with larger companies, and decision was made, and there we go. That partnership was formed. Went on to consult hospital systems around telemedicine, so really took the insights that I had gained around technology and brought it into a healthcare industry that doesn't like disruption or to adopt new things, but fortunately with a medical background, have been successful in helping hospitals do that prior to my running for office. In 2016, decided to run, not with a political party. What I believed when I started to evaluate my experiences going through the public school system here in Rhode Island, and seeing that not much has really changed, understanding the healthcare disparities, how they arise and are kind of perpetuated, as well as understanding the challenges of small business development. When I say small business, unlike every other gubernatorial candidate out there, I really mean micro businesses, and that's most of Rhode Island businesses. They're often disregarded by this administration and considered lifestyle companies, but I believe that businesses should self-define whether they're lifestyle companies, and they need an opportunity. They should have an opportunity to define themselves as something else, something greater, something bigger. And the only way to really create an environment where they can do that, I think, is by alleviating some of the tax burdens that they have. In relation to healthcare, community healthcare is really the investment we should be making. and we have a monopoly on health insurance in the state. And I'm explaining all this to lead to what my belief is about the party systems today. In terms of education, while I can accept that independent charter schools are incubators for innovation and that the choice around having access to those schools for students and families is not a bad thing, it can be good. I also feel that public school systems should not be dismissed. And if we can balance those two things, then great. I have concerns with corporate charter schools that are run by contract management organizations that push states and municipalities to increase the number of seats just because of business metrics, the desire to siphon off more public funds and create a profit. I do have concerns with those types of charter schools. So here I was, really with an understanding that we have these challenges in front of us, and neither party was really proposing solutions. Neither party, for some reason or other, can combine the possibility of reducing some of the most regressive taxes that we have, like the tangible property tax on our small businesses, or completely just doing away with the car tax, which I think is, even the way that we do it in Rhode Island, is much more regressive than the way Massachusetts does it. To not be able to combine that with the need to invest in community health, to open up our borders to more insurance companies to help us stabilize the cost of premiums, right? That helps all families. Whatever your economic status is, it helps all families. The fact that the parties couldn't do that led me to believe that neither party really advocates for economic justice. And economic justice to me is the ability for an individual in this country, which I believe is a good country. It can always be better, but it is a good country. For the individual who desires opportunity and is willing to work towards it to access it. Neither party was really creating an environment that was conducive to that individual's prosperity and personal growth, at least not as much as we could do.
Yeah, I could see improvements in the whole system. And one of the reasons why I chose to run as a Republican was I see a way to fix the way that the Republican Party functions and gets candidates, to help them embrace the true outsiders, the true citizen politician, the people who really honestly want to do a good job and make change rather than perpetuating power. And setting the example by winning would be one thing, but also using the influence within the party that I would gain from winning an office to help encourage more people like me to step forward and put themselves online to run for office, to do the hard work of knocking on doors or shaking hands and all the stuff you've got to do in order to make this work. So that is why I chose to run in a party rather than an independent. But that does mean that I need to be a party man in some cases. So while I can say hi to you and shake your hands, I endorse the Republican candidate no matter who the Republican candidate is.
Right, and I don't do that.
Just like Socrates decided rather than keep Athens during the good times and not bail out during the bad times, he went and drank the hemlock. So if I'm going to use the mojo of having a party, I need to put up with some limits on what I can do based on being in a party, and that is shaking hands with you but not endorsing you.
Yeah, and I'm not seeking endorsements from anyone, and I think that's why it's easy for me to be an independent. There are historical figures on both sides of the aisle that I think exhibited certain degrees of courage. Contextually, we might debate whether or not it was a little too radical, but whether it was Ida B. Wells, right, African-American, feminist, freedom rider, pro-Second Amendment Republican, or Bobby Kennedy, who was a Democrat advocating for improvements and really reform around social welfare systems to help people not really get stuck in those systems but transition out. Each existed in two spectrums of the aisle, different times in history, and really radical in what they were saying. So I can appreciate the courage that those leaders had, and the party that they were in has really nothing to do. But my concern with parties today is exactly what you've described, a machine that has certain pulley systems that function in certain ways, and it's those pulley systems and ways in which it functions that frankly is doing nothing for society, independent of the individual. So I would rather stand apart and confront those systems than ever really submit, and so be it if it's a greater challenge to succeed.
Yeah, Rhode Island's so small, the party system is you know, we tend to expect one party rule in Rhode Island because of our history, but the differences between Republicans and Democrats have declined more and more. The parties of the 1980s aren't the parties we have nowadays. In Rhode Island, Kennedy would be a Republican. In the ways of looking at the world, the dividing lines aren't there anymore. The dividing lines are based on, do people like you? Are you there for them? That's what people vote for. They aren't voting as much for what color uniform you wear.
Well, doesn't that, in some respects, kind of add to an independent?
It helps
more
the
than
independents.
more than a party.
Well, the vast majority of Rhode Islanders are registered as not technically independent. They are non-affiliated, but
well, independent
that
thinkers.
is our largest group of people who do not affiliate with a particular party, one or the other.
Yeah, and again, I almost want to detach this from the voters. I understand that individuals make choices to affiliate based on a set of values and ideas that they believe a party represents. My issue is with the machines that, in many respects, groom candidates, have those pulley systems around certain candidates. Right. Because when you get to the top, and frankly, I've been releasing a series of videos, and I'll continue to release them over the next month right up to the election day, revealing some of the truths about Rhode Island politics and how things function here. And I think it's important to delineate what corruption is. The difference between corruption that's embedded itself in the party politics versus special interest that, if we're considering certain media outlets that are creating debates and excluding candidates, may not in of themselves, you know, I wouldn't categorize them with that term corruption, but certainly there's an environment that's anti-outsider, and because of that, it enables the games that are currently going on in the party systems. And that's really the challenge that we're facing in Rhode Island. But yeah, at the top of these parties, it's the same operatives. That's just the truth. At the top, follow the funding. It is the same operatives funding all the candidates, helping them, advocating for them. And it is unfortunate that while it's only one standard deviation away to recognize it, I think Rhode Islanders have been so hurt over the decades as a result of bad decisions that many of them don't want to take that extra step to connect the dots. And what I'm hoping to do, both in this race and if given the opportunity as governor, is to make it very clear and very transparent who those individuals are, how this operation has been run, and to change it.
Now, we've made progress. We've gotten rid of the master lever on the ballot. So people will go down, but we still list party affiliation on the ballot. We still list who gets endorsed and who doesn't. So there's still a tremendous influence of the parties in not only the process of getting elected, of funding and phone banking and all the things that are there for people that the parties like and not there for the people the parties don't like. But we are getting closer and closer to a true people-ruled election. It'd be nice if all of our towns, all of our cities had non-affiliation, no affiliation listed on the ballots, so that you know, some of them already have this, that you vote for the person, not necessarily for the party.
Providence mayoral race, for instance.
That's an example.
Yep. No, yeah, I would. The master lever is gone. For those listening, essentially it was think of just filling in a box saying vote for all the Democratic candidates, and that was the master lever, right? But there are mechanisms in place. Yeah. Ballot nomination is an interesting process. The process of getting nominated and being placed on the ballot. The Democratic Party has has all of the candidates who've been endorsed on the single sheet. I believe the Republican Party as well.
The Republican
right?
Party, so the endorsed candidates all shared the signatures.
Right. So essentially, the independents, and I'm not complaining about this. I thought it was a great journey. I had to be interviewed by over 1,000 people, but I have to go out there and collect signatures, essentially convince residents of Rhode Island who are registered to vote to give me a chance, as a candidate, that I'm a serious candidate. And that process I considered a mini master lever, because it's harder for the outsider to get the nomination signatures. And even when you get them, now there's a lot of discussion from certain organizations that are sponsoring debates that being ballot certified is not being a serious candidate. And yet the whole process of getting ballot certified not only requires work effort, but persuasion, really a level of transparency, especially as an independent. You have to answer questions. You can't hide behind a party banner, and I'm not saying everyone does, but
I wasn't endorsed. I went through the same process.
Yeah.
So getting the signatures that week was the most nerve-wracking week I've ever spent. I am not a nervous person.
To the last day, right?
I can look beyond the current problems, but will I have enough signatures? Will the people who promise to get me a few more signatures actually deliver? Will they be properly counted once they're there? And they were so slow in counting those.
You're hoping there's not a thunderstorm the last 3 days,
or
right?
whatever. Now I did learn that if I had to do this again, that I do things a little bit differently. But for instance, get all my signatures in one location, so I just go to one town hall. That would have made life a lot easier than the kind of monumental trips I did, touring all of Rhode Island several times in 1 week.
Well, it took my team and I 8 hours to hand in all of the nomination forms, and to the minute.
Oh, to the minute.
To the minute, the last.
I finished mine about 2 o'clock, so I.
To the minute.
But I made the effort to deliver one signature form that had 3 signatures on it, just because I needed to be confident that I did everything possible, so that if I didn't make my numbers, it wouldn't be because I refused to go to that last place.
Well, we collected in total 1,700, but for some reason or other, only 1,397 were certified.
Well, the requirements are pretty arduous on some of it. If somebody wants to, they can say, "Oh no, that C looks like a G; it doesn't count."
Games.
And some of the things that were counted by the towns weren't counted by the Secretary of State, so the towns didn't necessarily turn in all the numbers the way they should have.
Well, I'm glad to be on the ballot. We're on the ballot.
We both had enough.
We're on the ballot. But it's interesting. The last 9 months, I actually spent 2017, I would say, doing a bit of a silent campaign. It wasn't canvassing or door knocking or meeting many voters, but it was in some respects going around asking what are these challenges, attempting to validate the assumptions. And in that process, what happened eventually was I decided, well, I really need to understand the culture of politics in Rhode Island, because one thing is growing up here, and having phrases like corruption used, but another thing is really seeing whether it's true. And so one way of learning for me was really just engaging retired politicians. And what are your thoughts? What was your experience? And sure enough, you have a base of about 10, and they give you their insights, and dots start to get connected. Storylines start to intersect, which is so interesting. And before you know, 1 or 2 decide that they're not so retired, and they want to recommend that you talk to another person. You keep talking because it's really an investigation in a lot of ways. And that's when it happened, right? 2017, you're at a point where you realize that corruption is real here. That there's so much handling and grooming, and it was, to understand the game and then to put it in the context of why our community centers are deteriorating, why Memorial Hospital is closing, why our schools are falling apart. It is a few individuals that just enjoy that access to power that have really put the rest of our lives in jeopardy and our families.
We need a different word than corruption, and I don't have a better word.
Well, special interest is an element, but I think it's corruption when there's harm
Right.
being done
when
to
we say
people.
corruption, most people think we're talking about piles of cash inside an envelope that's delivered, and really the corruption even goes down to the petty level of going someplace and they say, "Hey, governor, here's some free coffee." You get the free coffee because you're governor. That's favoritism, and the free coffee comes with the price, even if you don't know it.
Right, but there is coercion.
There is coercion.
There are threats.
Yeah, when
Right,
the
there
governor
are.
can accept donations from state workers, and the public record shows who donated and who didn't, there's got to be a level of, it may be dangerous to say extortion, it may be dangerous to say job buying, but there's got to be a factor where somebody starts to think, will my job be affected about whether or not I give donations to my boss's boss?
And a lot of it relates to the language. So I want to be very clear. There is corruption in Rhode Island in terms of very harsh language being used to persuade or influence an individual's decision. And that I qualify that as corruption.
Okay. And
it may not be money laundering, but it is.
Yeah,
it is
but I
certainly
wasn't
corruption.
disagreeing with
Yeah,
you. I just
hear you,
wish
hear
we
you.
had
But-
more versatility in our language.
Well,
We've got the most
some
versatile
people
language
say
in the world.
corruption and soft corruption, but
Yeah.
while we can play with the spectrum, the fact is it exists, and the reality is that my question has been, since I announced in January of this year, what environment have we allowed? We as the institutions, yes, but even as voters, what environment have we accepted here that has enabled those practices and that behavior to continue? And I waited 9 months, and for 9 months I've been actively campaigning. And this is part of what's been going on in my campaign. Actively campaigning, canvassing, festivals, forums, though limited in terms of how many as compared to the incumbent because of limited fundraising, but still active, making all the necessary sacrifices that a candidate frankly has to make in running a gubernatorial race. And some of those sacrifices are time with family, time with children, but they're also financial in nature. And making them because I believe, and I'm willing, my wife and I are willing to accept make any sacrifice because we believe that change needs to come to Rhode Island. And for 9 months, prime media outlets, Channel 12, ABC 6 News, Rhode Island Public Radio, right, were ignoring the fact that I was running. I mean, they weren't acknowledging my campaign. They were providing airtime to the majority of other candidates, 8 other candidates, and not to me. And I thought, well, perhaps I need to earn, perhaps there's a ladder. And I think this is just the colonization brain speaking, right? That you think that there's something you need to prove. And so I went on continuing to prove, getting ballot certified, et cetera. And thinking that at one point they would realize all the work that I was doing, the thousands, tens of thousands of people that I was meeting. And that didn't happen, right? Never got the airtime. Had an encounter with the Providence Journal executive editor the other day where I asked a question at one of the events about hyperpolarization, political hyperpolarization here in America, and said, does the exclusion of candidates, for instance, in the gubernatorial race, contribute or not to hyperpolarization, seeing that it's reducing the likelihood that they would add a diversity of ideas? And his response, which is on our Facebook page, at Road, RHODE, #2 Liberty. If you go at Road to Liberty on the Facebook search engine, you'll get our campaign page. I mean, his response was very interesting. Essentially, to summary statement would be, why put a candidate who I don't believe has a chance of winning, why allow a candidate that I don't believe has a chance of winning to contribute to the market of ideas? I mean, that's not democratic.
Well, news doesn't have to be democratic, but I understand what you're saying.
I think
It does not promote democratic discussion.
I think a gubernatorial debate should not be masked as a public debate when it is a private, exclusive debate.
Right.
And I have an issue with that. And I think the fact that it is placed out there as though it is a public debate, the message in of itself not being true is
Okay. Okay. I'll accept. It's a quibble with a word rather than the intent. Yeah, I fully agree with your intent. The challenge for the lesser-known candidates is being newsworthy. If you were newsworthy, you would get news. We have another gubernatorial candidate who just got arrested. She hit national news. So
Yeah, I won't be doing that.
yeah,
So,
but see, that's newsworthy. She got attention. Now, she didn't necessarily want that attention, but if you could impose yourself on the topic of the day, you have a chance.
Well,
but
what I find very
they're very little to do with us.
But what I find very interesting is that again, you have third-party candidate. You even have a third-party candidate who has not gotten a lot of national attention. I don't want to put his name out, but it's another gubernatorial candidate. Yep. I think it's good he's on the stage. I'm not advocating against him being on the debate stage, but not much in the way of campaigning in terms of canvassing. Certainly very low poll numbers, similar.
Yep.
No national news, and he's been given the opportunity. Good for him. I will not debate that, right? But it's simply a matter of a targeted exclusion of my candidacy. And these are organizations, some of those that have not covered me, which I've mentioned, that often consider themselves a specific media outlet that represents more of center-left, if you will, in terms of their stories and the candidates they often speak of. And yet they've given time to an independent that managed the Trump campaign in 2016, but not to an independent that not only grew up in Central Falls, but went on to really understand business and medicine. And we have healthcare disparities and educational disparities. This isn't about my being the only story in Central Falls. There are plenty of people that come out of Woonsocket, Central Falls, Pawtucket, Providence, but not many run.
Yeah.
And for news outlets that often focus on stories of disparities for Latino boys in the education system here in Rhode Island, to kind of hyperinflate those stories, but and then completely dismiss a candidate that's not using that card. Not.
Yeah.
So you're right. I'm not out there attempting to polarize myself.
You're not Irish?
But I'm not out there attempting to polarize myself, or I need to speak for all the people. But these are organizations that have decided to talk about those things, and then selectively exclude me from debates. And it needs to be said. And this is part of the environment that has enabled corruption. This is part of the environment that has kept outsiders that are willing to confront corruption and change the way we do things in Rhode Island out of office. It will not stop me. I will continue to campaign over the next 4 weeks, and I believe that the people, many are already starting to really catch on to what's going on. And so be it, whatever the repercussions or retaliations are for it. But if not us, then who? And Bobby Kennedy once said, and his brother said it as well, I believe, only those that are willing to fail greatly will ever achieve greatly. And I hope that the audience, the listeners, understand that that's not something I wish to just reflect as an individual, but I think the voters should reflect on that as well, that this election is important because in many respects it does reflect 2016. The stage that's being placed out there for you for the gubernatorial candidates and from the prime media outlets reflects 2016. And what we see are the extremes, but yet at the extremes, the same special interest driving decisions, the same delicate care about the words that they use, and they're addressing taxes, right? Why is no one talking about tangible property tax?
Yeah.
Why is no one saying that a 5-year phase out for car tax is ridiculous?
Yeah.
That we were promised this long ago, they changed their mind, and a 5-year phase out is just a play on electoral politics. We need the change today, and I believe that I'm the only candidate that's willing to and has the courage to really push that change forward.
Now, the tangible property tax, for the people who don't know, is the tax on every single thing that a business owns, even if it's been paid for and it's 50 years old.
Even if it's 50
years old.
There's
a tax on it. And I've talked to business owners who have paid for the same desk over and over and over again with tangible property tax. That's the reason why you go 5 miles outside of Rhode Island in any direction and you find warehouses of stuff that's going to be brought into Rhode Island after it's sold, because they don't want to have to pay for the warehouses and the forklifts and the racks and everything else associated with it when they could just bring it in on demand.
Right. No, we need change. I cannot say we need change. We have a healthcare system that is pricing people out of their care, and this is not a platitude that was shared by a candidate that lost in the primary. The reality is, it is a direct investment in community health that we need. We need to determine whether the insurance companies and the hospitals that are working with the insurers are willing to stabilize both the cost of care and the premiums at the rate that they're rising. And if they're not, we need to open our borders up to insurance companies that can provide equal value products in terms of the coverage at a more reasonable price, or some version of a stable price over time.
There's a lot of things that need to be done, and some of them are things that just haven't been discussed, and some of them are things that are being actively resisted by people who have influence. So yes, we need to handle it.
And those are the special interests that I think contribute to an environment that keeps outsiders out of your view, of the audience's view, right? Because that's really what we're talking about. I've been campaigning for 9 months. I mean, I have been all around the state. There's evidence on the Facebook page if you'd like to validate that. But when Channel 12, with its ratings, has an audience of so many thousands of people, and it decides to stage a gubernatorial event, stage it, and it places candidates that will cancel each other out so that an incumbent ultimately walks in without being challenged, I do consider that
So you're seeing a political motivation rather than a financial motivation?
Well, I think, listen, there are polls that are done, and those polls are sponsored by some media outlets.
Okay.
Not all. So let me be very clear here. I want to be clear that this is a media outlet, right? There are alternative media outlets online. I am very grateful for the coverage received here at GoLocal Providence. Mr. Pat Ford, the time he's given me, Bill Bartholomew, Frank Prosnitz, Arlene Violet, WPRO. I mean, I just have to mention that there are media outlets that are attempting to do their best to reveal, if you will, or share the candidates and their perspectives with Rhode Islanders. But then you have, again, certain media outlets that decide not to. And so the question becomes why, right? Why? It's clear to me that based on the laws that the FCC has put forward, there really is a broad interpretation of equal time, which essentially equates to any of the media outlets having the freedom to say, we will not cover you. But when they cover everyone else except you, that presents a challenge because it is very targeted. Right.
I am sure it absolutely feels that way, and I'm not saying it's not.
Well, even based on the interpretation of the law, I mean, if it is clearly 1 out of 8 that's not provided with coverage.
If they provide exposure to a candidate who polls lower than you, who has less name recognition than you, has less viability than you, then of course you should have been included too. So,
and that's what's happening.
And I'm trying to say that without saying candidate names. So
yeah, no, but right. So I guess what I'm getting at is, and we can jump into issues more if you'd like, but just I'm getting to the point where there's evidence, and I've been patient and waiting, and frankly, I've really focused on a value system that is different from the value system projected by many of the candidates. Some don't necessarily project one because they reside within the sphere of the party. But I have projected a value system, ideas that are unique, and frankly a pragmatic path to getting there. And now it's really time to talk about the corruption. Now it's really time to talk about the special interests that have enabled that corruption and how it's working against Rhode Islanders. And I'll spend the next 4 weeks engaging that battle, and I really just invite the audience to join me. It is a learning curve, but believe me, it won't take more than just a few hours to really understand why Rhode Island finds itself in this current state. And when I say this current state, it's a bit of a stagnancy. I know that we're talking about innovation and technology, but the mechanics of helping a local economy grow around that technology haven't changed.
It's based an awful lot on assumptions that may not have been valid in the first place, or if they were valid, they're no longer valid. It's based on the lack of accountability among the people that make the decisions.
Well, look at technology. Sorry for interrupting. Software as a service.
Yeah.
before we've created what I would call tech economy, it hasn't come to fruition yet. But before we even get there, before we've invested in retraining programs around cybersecurity for youth to access employment after high school and to engage an amazing field, right, and to propel them forward, and for Rhode Island to shine on its own and not have a parasitic relationship, before we've gotten there, we've gone and expanded the sales tax to software as a service.
Yeah.
So every tool, every software tool created now to improve your accessibility to entertainment when you're at home at a reasonable price, because cable is pushing people out. The opportunity for education institutions to access online resources on a monthly basis, on a subscription basis. The opportunity for small businesses to have financial software to improve their overhead, or essentially for it to be cheaper to run their operations and to do point-of-sale transactions. All of these different tools that have been created to help the individual that wants to prosper and is working hard to do it and really has been thinking about ways of creating efficiency. Now the state expands the sales tax
And says,
to take,
don't do it in Rhode Island. We want you to do it someplace else. We don't care about you.
and pretty much every level of efficiency that you've created, in whether it's for your personal way of life or for your business now, the state works against you.
Yeah.
And you're back to ground zero. That's not progress.
No.
And I'm using a technology example in saying this. This isn't even...
And we're doing the same thing, like you said, with the tangible assets,
Right.
taxing that, taxing sales tax on, in my instance, I mentioned it before you came in, sales tax on everything that is sold by a website that's in Rhode Island.
And it translates over to the end, to the end buyer,
So
the end customer.
we're too small for that sort of thing to happen, because go just a couple miles down the road, you're in another state where that doesn't happen.
Right. And where I differ in, I would say, approach to candidates that talk about blanket statement tax reductions is that I have an awareness that it will be $215 million to remove the car tax. Right? And we need to address that. But this administration has run a deficit, and frankly, if we look at the bleed happening with some of the failed projects, I think we could have removed that tax and been fine, as long as we would have spent wisely and stopped some projects before the bleed worsened. We can digress.
And we're getting off topic onto tax policy rather than.
But I guess my approach is it's not so much tax policy as it is that though progress does happen in stages, but the important thing is that the first step have a clear direction. And many of the ideas proposed don't have a clear first step by other candidates. And what I'm saying is there's a clear step in saying that Providence makes $50 million off of tangible property taxes. $50 million. And when we look at all of the institutions in Providence that could in some respect contribute to the local economy through services by opening up their institutions, but they don't, and yet they benefit from not paying taxes, right? All the academic centers, right, that we have around here, they do payments in lieu of taxes. There are ways of innovating around just getting these institutions to contribute learning resources, contribute consultation, advocacy to the local economy in some respect, to business owners, to entrepreneurs. And by making those contributions, you can continue to avoid or have the benefits of not paying all these taxes or having a very small payment in lieu of taxes. But then by doing that, as a state now, perhaps we can quantify what that service is, what that benefit is, and then really start to look for ways of developing kind of municipal incentives, like target Providence first in reducing tangible property tax, see how it works here, and then expand from our capital city outward. But show how these institutions can help the local economy thrive, as well as meet the businesses halfway with these reductions in tangible property tax. They're innovative ways, these are called silots, right? So instead of payments in lieu of taxes, which they call pilots, there's services in lieu of taxes, which are called silots. These models have worked around, in some places in the country, but even around the world. And I'm really the only candidate in the gubernatorial race, at least, there have been some other races, that's talking about this programmatic change that can help all Rhode Islanders.
Now, I've also heard silence used in reference to medical treatment, where a dentist, instead of paying taxes, would do services worth the same value, or even maybe greater value in lieu of taxes. That way, he serves the community, gets a tax deduction from doing that service. Everybody wins, because the amount of money that he would have paid that would then be paid to taking care of people's teeth or whatever the medical service is through our community services no longer goes through the money churn and the money loss, so the inefficiencies of a state providing a service.
Right, and that is a wonderful model. You did bring up a healthcare provider, so let's be honest, the insurance companies and the pressure they're putting, I mean, a healthcare provider, a physician, will get 30% less reimbursement in Rhode Island as compared to Massachusetts for the same service. So yes, we should be looking at innovative, creative ways of getting the institutions and different professions involved with helping build the next generation of talent, helping build the next wave, if you will, of healthcare providers, while also helping the community. I think that we can do that, but we really need to address the monopolies, the special interests, really all the things, again, that are blocking progress in Rhode Island. And there was no other option, there's never been, but I would say even when reflecting on all the advice, I mean, you've previously said, oh, you should consider having a party. I give every suggestion, every piece of advice a fair amount of time in reflecting, but there was never, in my mind, a moment where it ever made sense for me to run in a party, because these challenges are too complex to fit in some of the kind of oversimplified arguments, at least at the gubernatorial level, that the parties are projecting. We need much more. We need programmatic change, and I hope that Rhode Islanders, I hope the audience, I hope those listening share this, this video will help inform your neighbors, your family members, your friends that my candidacy is a serious one, that though I may be an independent, that with the people coming out to vote, with 300,000 individuals that have previously decided not to vote in the last election cycle coming out to vote, that we can make all the change that we want to see here in the state of Rhode Island.
So your approach is make the change by getting the position and make the change directly into the function of government, where I see reforming the party as an essential part of the process for me. If I can reform how the party chooses candidates, how the party supports candidates, how the party develops the shared goals that party members have, and that will fix the reputation of the party, fix the viability of the party, and then make it a strong tool that could then be used to help with the kinds of changes you would like to see. So that is why I chose my path rather than your path. You chose a path because you saw a clearer way of getting success in what you're trying to do.
There's a friend that once said, within the context of this race, you need a base. This was the friends, and he said, you know, parties provide a framework for a legacy, and the legacy could in of itself be a value system. So if it's not you, someone can carry the torch forward.
Okay,
right?
That's a valid thing to say.
Right,
yes.
that was what they said. And I can understand that logic.
Yeah.
And I can, if you're building a party from the ground up that's innovative in of itself, and you're willing to be the founding thinker, if you will, then I understand that mission. It's as strong as a nonprofit organization that is trying to lead the way around, provide advocacy around an issue that's been disregarded. I can respect that. But I'm really offering my candidacy, my desire to see change to such an extent where I'm willing to sacrifice anything and everything, my reputation, everything that I am, to see it through. And running as an independent, in as much kills a political career as anything else, but this is what I believe Rhode Island could benefit from.
Yeah. Now, you said legacy. The legacy I hope to leave in the Lieutenant Governor's office is one where I do something worthwhile, that people are able to see that we can do something with that job and not just laugh at it, as the state cheerleader and emergency backup governor. And the next person is going to have to do a better job. And the one after that's going to have to do a better job. So by achieving something worthwhile, not just using as a hammock before retirement, that is going to be what creates the legacy for me. And fixing the party that I joined would also help push my message farther forward. So that's also part of the legacy.
If I could have any legacy, it wouldn't be my name on a building. It wouldn't even be a picture of me. It would be, in 4 years, having 15 to 20,000 18 and 19-year-olds more engaged in entrepreneurship, in advocacy, in the political process, as well as having the generations that came before us with more hope. I would say that the youth that's been empowered will look after them, will make decisions that will be intergenerational in some respect. That's my hope. My hope is to restore that sense of faith in the individual here in Rhode Island, that we can help businesses and our elders and children just as much, right? That the country we live in is great, but it is greatest when the individual has the education and the health to fight the special interests, to compete in the market, to stabilize markets as a unit. And right now we have pockets of communities that are disenfranchised, and if they can all come together in this race, I think that's the first step to change.
Yeah, I missed the opportunity there to say the big picture thing that you did so eloquently, and now I think, oh God, I just limited it to this race. But yes.
But you had the party, perspective. So just as an individual,
the ultimate goal is to make Rhode Island a place that thrives, that people want to live in, that their children want to raise their families here and go to school and stay here.
That the individual
exactly. It is an individual thing. But I see my stepping stones, the way of getting there. The first domino to push is running for office, and that's pretty much for you too. Is running for office is the first step.
Right.
Okay. Looks like we've taken all of all of Pat's time.
You and I have some conversation.
Yeah, I guess that that was my interview for my future radio show. Hopefully, I've got.
You guys are great. You guys should do a show together called The Independents or something.
Yeah, well, I'm affiliated. So, but if they succeed in kicking me out, which they haven't been threatening to kick me out, folks, then there's that possibility.
You know where you have a home.
Yep. Okay, great.
Thank you so
great
much.
talking to you.
Yeah, great.
Thank
Best
you,
of
folks.
luck.
Doctor, just sit there for just 1 second.
Okay, will do.
Okay.
All right. See.
And we're back. We are the Coalition, loud and proud. So, the good doctor, Paul Pence, having their own conversation on the show. I think you guys should do your own show. We can come up with something catchy.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming on tonight.
Thank you for
What
the
precipitated
opportunity.
you coming back, besides just wanting to have an ongoing dialogue about where we stand in the campaign, was an event that took place this week that was sponsored by primarily the Providence Journal.
Yes.
And, you know, if you saw any of the run-up to this, and it's tough because it's got to be frustrating because the news cycle is just so brutal this time around that what should constitute major issues and major causes for discussion get consumed pretty much within a matter of hours by the next crisis du jour and the next crisis du jour and the next crisis du jour. So what happened, what transpired was, if I can sum it up loosely, and I'm going to let you jump in a second, was that there was a public occurrence, which is a panel discussion, and it was largely focusing on the quality and style of discourse that's taking place as part of the political process, and how much of what is leading to this incredible divide that exists right now.
Right.
That was the setup. I believe, as far as I know, it was Mr. Rosenberg, the editor, was on the panel. I believe Ted Nisi from Channel 12.
Correct.
Who else was?
They were the two individuals on the panel that represented different media outlets, Providence Journal and Channel 12, WPRI. But all of the other panelists represented different professions. Some were professors, some psychologists, some experts, authors in the field of kind of polarization, if you will, political science.
Right.
Yeah.
What happened then? Give me the tenor of the conversation. This is one of those things I wanted to go to, but there were about 5 things happening that night.
Well, as I described previously, and I'll just summarize with Mr. Pence, over the past 9 months, I would say I've been patiently waiting to receive some level of equal coverage as the other candidates. It turns out that equal coverage was not provided, whether it was Rhode Island Public Radio and their 10-minute roundtable or newsmakers on Channel 12 WPRI. None of those opportunities really came to fruition. So I felt, having been excluded from the first gubernatorial debate that WPRI sponsored, that I would go to the event that was talking about hyperpolarization to really see what the representatives of those two organizations were going to say. And sat in the middle top of Sappingsley Hall at Rhode Island College and listened. And much of what was said by those representatives, executive editor of the Providence Journal was one of them, was that they always look to balance arguments to really provide a media platform that shows all sides of all views, I would say, of the political spectrum, and that they were doing their best to kind of mitigate or reduce that level of hyperpolarization that we're seeing in politics, the extremes, right?
Right.
And I was challenged with hearing that and having been excluded from the first and now excluded, they're going to exclude me from the second, October 15th.
Now, and let me jump in for a second.
Yeah.
I want to provide just someone who's gotten to know you well, but is not part of your campaign. I consider you a friend, but I'm not involved in your day-to-day organization or publicly identified, quote unquote, as one of your supporter base or any of that. You know what I mean? So I'm an outsider, a friendly outsider looking in, who, because we've become friends, I've gotten to understand exactly the effort you're putting in. And I just want to reflect, regardless of how I or anyone feels about your platform, if you're looking at the level of maturity and seriousness that's being dedicated towards this campaign, you have fulfilled every step. You routinely campaign all around the state. You've fulfilled the statutory requirement to be on the ballot. You've done everything essentially that's been asked of you by the quote unquote poobahs, if you will, of the political process. You have worked your butt off, to be frank, to provide thought out, articulate takes, for lack of a better term, on the issues of the day. You provided them in an electronic, a written, and a verbal format routinely. And you have displayed willingness to be completely transparent with regard to literally everything about your campaign. Does that sum it up enough?
Yeah, I mean, I've made every effort to do these things, and I've done them, and there's a historical record.
Right.
Whether on Facebook, whether on the website, whether on Twitter, I've quoted it in certain articles, Dr. Arlene Violet, right, and Valley Breeze. I mean, there's evidence to show that I've been campaigning, and yet I waited with an understanding that as an outsider, as someone that perhaps these organizations don't know, that perhaps there was something I needed to prove. And that's why I waited. That's why, frankly, I didn't dispute the lack of coverage, the lack of equal time. But when it came to the debates, I mean, that's such an essential part of democracy. I'm willing to forego the whole idea of an interview. It's evidence to show that I've been excluded across the months. But in terms of, I'm not reactionary towards that. But the debates are different. I mean, it is democracy. It is, and I mentioned this to Mr. Pence, I feel like it's creating an artificial sense of a public debate when it's really more of a private, exclusive stage for just a few candidates that the organizations want to see in office.
And you almost wonder if Channel 12 should be listing an in-kind contribution to the people, because it is not a public debate. And I want to point out that these are public airwaves. We often forget, as a libertarian, I support the concept of private property heavily, but the airwaves are not, in fact, their property. It's something they've got on loan. And it's my contention that a lot of these large media outlets seem to have forgotten that that they don't have exclusive domain over this, and there was always written into these rules, and I'm not, again, as a libertarian, I'm not big on rules, but part of the rules is, there is a implicit, stated, not just implicit, but stated concept that there's an obligation by these organizations, since they have the use of the public airwaves, that they are to provide value to civics issues, particularly surrounding campaigns and elections.
Right. So here's a challenge when, I mean, these large media conglomerates are allowed to have an objective criteria, certain requirements, so that you can get into the debate. Money, certain level of polling, so support from the community that's polled, or a tally is taken, if you to simplify it. And that all was instated to reduce the likelihood that anyone could be discriminated against.
Right.
But where I fall on where my opinion resides, or my sense of it being a bit discriminatory, what Channel 12 has done, is that there was a company, the company that Channel 12 was owned by in 2014 was absorbed by another company. But all of the companies have a criteria.
Right.
And really the whole practice, based on individuals that are my network that work in the industry, the local stations have some discretion as to whether how they enforce that criteria. And in 2014, Mr. Bob Healy did not fundraise. And fundraising is always an element of the criteria. So there was an exception made for Mr. Bob Healy to get on the televised WPRI debate.
Right.
And the challenge is, why was that exception made then and not now, if not that this is complete political staging? Placing candidates on a stage, and in some cases kind of skewing the ideological arguments or spectrum, right? You have two candidates, two Republicans on the first debate stage. One that calls himself an independent but Republican. Here they go, cancel each other out, and the incumbent walks through without being challenged about the significant issues that we need to talk about, like UHIP and so forth. So yeah, I find it to be a challenge. A complete disconnect with what democracy should be about, even if it is a private company. ACLU, I reached out to the ACLU, just trying to really understand, how does freedom of speech, kind of civil discourse, the facade of a public debate, how does all that play into the ACLU's perspective on the matter? And really just wanted to understand. It was an inquiry of understanding. And the response was that, well, this is a private company, therefore, pretty much it's not in our purview. And then I started to think, well, 1965, 1963, I mean, how many times in history have we had challenges arise with civil issues that where the ACLU as an organization has a perspective or an opinion on a private company and how they conduct themselves. So just putting it into historical context here, we have advocacy organizations here in Rhode Island that tend to address issues selectively, but when we have, again, a facade of a public debate being projected as democracy and it's not challenged by those organizations, then it leads me to believe that the special interests have just spread so far beyond government.
Right.
It's disheartening.
Yet at the same time, and let's get more into the event in a second here, but at the same time, the particularly disheartening part of it for you has got to be, and you're a trooper because you give it right back. It's good for you.
Transparency is important, and if I'm not willing to confront an organization that is doing something like this, how would I ever confront the corruption that resides in Rhode Island state government?
Right, and here you have an organization hosting an event describing civil discourse and inclusion, not being particularly inclusive, and then, as it turns out, not being particularly civil either.
Well, I'll let the video speak for itself. You can go to the Facebook page at RHODE2 Liberty, so at Road to Liberty on the Facebook search engine, and you can see the video. In the video, I essentially ask a question, and I may be paraphrasing at this time, but essentially introduced myself as a candidate, a little bit of my background very quickly, and went on to ask whether exclusion of candidates from the debate preceding one and the one that's coming up contributes or does it contribute or not contribute to the hyperpolarization that we're seeing in the country and here in the state of Rhode Island? And the response involved things like, well, where have you posted material? Where have you been? A website is not enough. I've seen your Facebook page, you post frequently. I mean, these were bits of information that were somewhat contradictory that were being shared by the individual at the front of the stage representing a major media outlet here in Rhode Island. And yet within those facts that were within that, I would say, perspective that was being shared, the evidence was right there. 9 months. I'm not a fan of photo ops, but what I've learned in this campaign is they're necessary because of this. You need a documented history of showing that you made an effort to canvass, to go and meet individuals, and there's the historical record. If a website wasn't enough, which in the individual's perspective it wasn't, then the Facebook page. If that wasn't enough, there was Twitter. Other than paying for advertising, which I would agree, have not raised enough to do that. There seems to be enough evidence, historical evidence, to show that I've been campaigning. The way in which it was communicated, I would say, it seemed a bit harsh in tone.
Right. Yeah. No, condescending is another one of them.
It was an experience of humility to sit there and have an audience of 120 people and to absorb it. But it was good that it was said, and I think the audience heard, because what that is it's a testament to some of the challenges in the environment that we have in Rhode Island, which frankly has enabled, as I mentioned before, a lot of the corruption that we're seeing, because an outsider who wants to challenge the system is often pushed out, and these are mechanisms that I think are used by operatives and so forth to keep things the way they are.
Yeah, no, and the frustration here is these same media outlets express their own frustration at the lack of participation, the lack of ideas, while giving little coverage to them and obsessing over what I call handicapping in the race. I would love to have someone do a study as to how much, a group like Media Matters or one of the impartial media organizations nationally, to take all the coverage in Rhode Island, a small state like Rhode Island, and somehow do an analysis of how much time was spent talking about who was beating who in the race, who was affiliating with who in the race, versus policy positions covered by people in the race. Because when you when you juxtapose that with this constant call on the editorial side of the Providence Journal for new leadership, new ideas, and then this constant call for the next generation to get involved.
Even Rhode Island Public Radio, same, right?
Yeah,
Calls for leadership and complete disregard for my candidacy.
Well, it's calls for leadership that they like on NPR. I mean, understand that NPR was sued by, here's an organization that espouses to great things, is liberal by definition in nature, and was sued by a female reporter for salary discrimination. Yikes. So, it's hypocrisy doesn't fall far from the trees. My own experience with NPR, Scott McKay put out a call. Why can't people running for office swear not to support or vote in favor of laws for moral obligation bonds? This is 2 years ago. So within a couple hours, we had a press release that the three General Assembly candidates from the Libertarian Party, 2 of whom were involved effectively in one-on-one races and had done all the things you talked about, and were running serious campaigns, all put together a pledge that they would vote for legislation that would eliminate moral obligation bonds. I mean, within hours.
Well,
and they completely. Yeah. I've yet to get a return phone call from Scott McKay. It's been 2 years, so I guess I should give up because he refuses to acknowledge our existence.
Well, I conducted a silent protest, and I thank all the supporters that were there for the last debate. Stood outside with flags and with the supporters in a silent protest. I mean, there were some individuals talking, but silent in the context of not attempting to make a ton of noise and disrupt the debate, but rather just to show that in solidarity we believe in democracy. And there were many of these individuals that represent different organizations that walked right past us. It didn't matter to them, right? And that was what was interesting. Matt Allen was there, though. He came by and he said hi. So it just shows that the difference in some journalists and reporters and how they engage candidates, you can see the difference. And so this is not a blanket statement that all media outlets or all journalists believe this. This is really, as much as I'm being targeted and excluded, I'm targeting the organizations that are doing the excluding when sharing this. We do have another protest, a silent protest, October 15th, outside of the second debate at the University of Rhode Island campus. It is between 6 and 8 o'clock that we will be there. I invite everyone to join us, stand with me, solidarity for democracy. This isn't about our ideological differences. This is about the fact that we have candidates on the ballot that not as individuals should necessarily have the right, but I believe that the voters should have the right to hear from them to determine whether the diversity of ideas that exist on that ballot, that whether any of them connect with the vision that you have for your life. Really, that's what I believe. It's hard to separate the individual, right? The argument like I would like to be on the debate stage from the real impact that it's having on democracy. Right. By not putting me on the debate stage and not having anyone that's willing to challenge the other candidates with some of these pragmatic solutions that they're not talking about, where does their conversation go? If it goes for the second debate the way it did for the first, it will simply be a lot of name-calling, accusations around corruption without any real delineation about where the change needs to happen or what is in fact the corruption.
Yeah, it's just simply talking points. Well, I call it the ESPN,
the MMA of politics.
You've got what's the ESPN show late at night where they all try to get the sports center. I call it the Sports Center effect. That's what I was trying to think of. Where everyone's trying to get the line in, the zinger that will capture media attention the next day. This, of course, being the same media that will obsess over the zinger while simultaneously crying for a lack of ideas or a lack of vision or future. Now, and then let's bring in, and I'm going to play the generational card here. We expect young people, and to me you're young, not young, in
33.
Yeah, you are the next generation of leadership. You've established yourself. Your academic credentials are complete. You've established yourself here in the state as a successful young person. what message are we sending to people if, in fact, it's if A, we're going to A, root for laundry. You'll hear me use that Seinfeld line all the time because that's what's going on. B, simultaneously, you will do whatever you can to crowd out ideas from a generation that hasn't had the opportunity to screw government up. Largely, the people at that meeting are people who have had long-term stakes in the existing government of Rhode Island.
Right.
Just thinking that it's, I'm not going to fault those people individually for it, but it isn't working so well. So
and
why
everyone
not
on
listen to serious voices?
And everyone on the debate stage is, even if one of them is returning from retirement, has played within the system. And if nothing else, my concern is with the current candidate landscape that's being represented on the debate stage. They're either desensitized to the corruption and the tactics that are currently played in holding Rhode Island back. They're actively a part of them, right? Second. Or third, they're convincing themselves that they're not a part of it, but they've been all along.
Right.
I mean, it's just, right? How do we change?
My question is, what are they afraid of? I mean, why not? I mean, in my thought, the public, because these are public airwaves, are owed an opportunity, at least once, to listen to folks who are serious candidates. And if you've done all the things that you've done, you're a serious candidate, because the powers that be have decided who the serious candidate is going to be. We are prevented from hearing about new ideas, new options, and different perspectives. I can't see how that's helpful at any level. And I'm sorry if that doesn't meet their programming angle, or if having, and we're not talking about, a table of 13 either. There's only a select few people who have actually met the standards necessary. And really, the independent candidates come down to you, Mr. Gilbert. At this point, other people are occupied now.
Yeah,
but,
Mr. Trillo. Mr. Trillo, right? He's independent.
Yeah, and so, what's the problem?
Yeah, so for the second debate, to inform everyone, they've added Mr. Bill Gilbert Moderate Party. So it's 2 third-party candidates, Democrat and Republican. And I don't know if the other candidate will be preoccupied because of recent events in their life. And so really, I'm the only candidate that...
Who else besides Gilbert and... Mr. Trillo, okay.
Yeah.
So it's right. So those 4 will be on there.
Listen to the video on Facebook. I mean, I think that really says
really
it all.
Speak for itself.
It does speak for itself. But I'm not stopping. They won't stop me, and I think it's really important at this time to determine as voters whether with me you're willing to dare greatly and to really change what's going on in Rhode Island, and to empower all of your friends and family that have been disheartened over the years and jaded by this system that really seems to work against the individual. If you can really empower them with an understanding that there's a candidate that has a vision that is completely focused on the individual. And I know that being head of the Libertarian Party, you find yourself in a certain spectrum where we disconnect. Yeah, but I think we can both agree that, that the individual
our presidential candidate was polling in the double digits at one point and was not allowed to participate nationally in the debates in the same set of issues. In our case, we had 2 experienced, successful, multi-term governors running serious campaigns that were on the ballot in all 50 states. So a direct analogy to your situation. And we were polling at one point into the double digits. And, it's a moving target. They're not, I'll say it because you're a candidate and you're too polite. They are not interested in ideas that will make the current standard operating procedures look foolish. They are not interested in the type of remedies or approaches that a generation that's grown up under vastly different circumstances and different perspectives and different levels of education, they're just, the media elite has got a narrative that they want to fulfill. And there's dozens and dozens of reasons for it, but quite frankly, as far as I'm concerned, if you're the Providence Journal or if you're one of the TV stations, it's cowardice.
So my question for voters is, are you willing to accept that? Are you willing to accept a group of elite, self-proclaimed elite individuals to continue to define the rules by which we all have to play? I'm not willing to accept that. We have an affordable housing crisis. We have environmental threats, I would say, if nothing else. We have a complete disregard of communities in South Providence related to the liquefied natural gas. We have had a disregard of the community in Burville for the plant project. We have a disregard of the amount of youth violence that we're seeing grow. We're not innovating around getting youth programs, getting youth involved. There is a disregard of the challenges that we're facing, and we are all facing it. The young adult, the single mother, the middle income family, your middle class family, everyone is facing the challenges that I've delineated alike. And so what kind of governor do you want to see? A governor that continues to play within the rules of the games that have been pre-established, because those rules won't allow for change. They'll allow for platitudes, and they may get one or two things, but they'll give up 5 or 6, and those 5 or 6 things are just as essential as the 1 or 2. Or are you willing to take a chance on a candidate that, whatever the consequences, will not be intimidated by the very elites that believe that their rules are the only rules that matter? They will not be intimidated by parties or party tactics or the operatives that stand above the parties. What I'm hoping that the audience and voters understand is that I'm doing this because I care, because I want to establish a foundation with which the leaders that come after will be able to build something even greater, and not a foundation that's just as weak as the one that we have now, which the leaders in the past have allowed to, have created or fostered. But I need your help, and the way that I need your help as an independent, fundraising is great. Thank you if you donated. Thank you if you can donate. But really, at this point, it's people power. It's spreading the word, empowering. Take on that robe of ambassadorship of the message that I've shared. And if you believe in it, go out there and spread it as though you were the candidate. And if you can get the numbers, if you can empower enough people to come out and vote that haven't voted before, we can win this race. The last time there were 6 people on the ballot, an independent won. That's a fact. And the independent was going against a well-known and well-liked at the time Democrat candidate.
Right.
So this can happen. We can win, and we can change the way that we do things in Rhode Island to ensure that the individual, the families here, have access to opportunity, have access to health care, affordable living, and frankly have a leader that's willing to advocate on their behalf, especially as it relates to confronting the corruption that exists in that state house.
Okay.
Thank you.
Give us one more rundown on where folks can find you.
You can reach the website at www.luisdanielmunoz.com. That's luisdanielmunoz.com. A shorter version to reach the website is www.road, R-H-O-D-E, 2, liberty.com. So that's road, as in Rhode Island, to liberty.com. You can reach our Facebook page by going into the Facebook search engine and putting in @road, R-H-O-D-E, to Liberty, and that will get you to the campaign page. On the Facebook campaign page, you'll have updated events. We're having an event in Bristol. We're having the protest in 2 weeks. I have a parade, and if you want to participate in the parade with us this upcoming Sunday on the Hill, you can also find interviews. You'll find this video. You'll also find radio interviews, previous press releases, articles, a documented history of all the many events we're attending. Tomorrow's a long day. I'll try to live stream some of those events so that you can see some of that campaigning actively. It is a great adventure. It is amazing to interact with voters all around the state. And one thing they're all saying is they all want change. And no one on the debate stage that was created by, that was, I would say, designed by the first media outlet, Channel 12, many of those candidates weren't attractive to many of the voters I'm encountering. So people want something completely different.
Right.
And please let them know that that candidate exists. And thank you so much for your support. I'm very grateful, and I truly believe that together we can bring change to Rhode Island that needs to happen. Thank you.
There you go.
Yeah.
I'm not going to ruin that. Folks, we are the Coalition, loud and proud, outrage porn-free, civilly disobedient media, broadcasting live on the worldwide Coalition Network here at the GoLocal Live Broadcast Center, 90 Way Boston Street, deep in the heart of the city we love, Providence, Rhode Island, the naked city, the city of 1,000 stories. You heard a couple tonight, candidates that you may or may not have encountered before that you need to listen to. Regardless of whether you decide to support them, it's important that you understand their ideas, their motivation, their perspective. And that's what we do here at the Coalition. Facebook.com/The Coalition Radio, on the mighty Twitter at Coalition_radio, are all anti-billionaire baseball, boys club, apolitical, Paw Sox feed at Pawtucket is home. Folks, I just want to reiterate again a big thank you to our supporters. Yacht Club Soda, Rhode Island's boutique soda before we even knew we needed boutique sodas. Listen, this is a 3-day holiday weekend. Yeah, the Pats game was on Thursday. You're probably going to be doing some type of football-related activity, some type of outdoor event. You're going to spend a lot of time cooking, baking now and into the fall and into the winter. Don't use the refinery soda and all natural flavors, real sugar, real ingredients, real vanilla, real ginger. Wonderful stuff. Of course, Beacon Shipping and Logistics at beaconshippingandlogistics.com. Worldwide automobile shipping right here in Warwick, Rhode Island. Dealers around the country use them. You should too. And of course, Air Products. Darryl Gould and his hardy team traverse the state fighting biohazards. They are supermen, fighting doing mold remediation in schools, businesses, and homes, making your life safer, cleaner. Folks, they've got specials all the time for folks who might be involved in, let's just say cancer recovery, issues where their immune system might be compromised, and a clean home, clean at an organic level that the ordinary citizen can't do. They do a lot of volunteer work for people. I'd look them up. We'll be back next week. We'll be delivering to you candidates and information. Again, we are outrage porn free. Have a wonderful Columbus Day weekend. Take some time this weekend, though, with an impending election just a month away. Take some time to do the homework. Don't rely on third-party reporting. Don't rely on legacy media that's got their own angle and their own agenda. Do your own homework. And again, as always, please take it personally. We'll see you next week.